Hey guys, welcome everybody to the Crypto Times inaugural live stream. I am your host, the Crypto Baron, and today we are absolutely privileged to be joined by none other than the Charles Hoskinson, the Chief Executive Officer at Input Output Hong Kong. Now, Charles, sorry, please.
No, I was going to say it's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
Oh, believe me, the pleasure is all ours. But Charles, it's my belief that technology has made a big world small. In most ways, this has been a great development for humanity. In others, it's brought problems that were kept on the other side of the globe to our doorstep. It forced us to confront issues we'd rather pretend don't exist. And all this has steadily built the political turmoil that we're seeing today because the world is simply coming together faster than our change-resistant sensibilities and culturally programmed beliefs allow. Now, I want to emphasize political turmoil because I think political institutions are largely useless and counterproductive. Politics is just bluster in discussing problems. Economics is where the problems are actually solved. And I strongly believe that what the internet has done for the flow of information and technological innovation, the blockchain will do for the flow of value and the global economy. And on that note, I really, truly am honored to be hosting one of the men at the forefront of this innovation. Every day, he's in the trenches building the infrastructure to eventually solve these global problems. The man, fable from across the kitchen table, Mr. Charles Hoskinson. Now, Charles, right now, you are receiving an enormous global standing ovation from our 3 billion live viewers.
Right.
Easily.
I think there's a margin of error in that number.
Yes, this largest audience that YouTube has ever had. This even eclipses the 2 billion people that attended Emperor Trump's inauguration in Washington, D.C.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure I'm deserving of it, but
of course,
it is a pleasure to be on. You know, it's funny you bring up the global transformation that blockchain technology is bringing to the financial markets. And what's really cool about it is it's just, in my view, a natural continuation of the internet. You know, before the internet, you know, and I'm old enough to remember some of those days, you know, I'd ride my bicycle to the library and I'd go check out books all the time. And I'd have to write it back and bring them back. And so what does that mean? The movement of information took time, effort, and money. So we tended to build society around repositories of knowledge and repositories of knowledge keepers. So that's where you build the palace around the universities and so forth. And then suddenly the internet came out, and the cost of moving information and storing information and curating and analyzing it went to zero effectively, and it became global. So then people started asking, hang on a second here, if there's no cost to moving information, why should there be a cost to moving money or value? And, you know, that's where digital currencies came from. And now we're starting to realize that emergently there's a heck of a lot more than just the movement of value. There's also this notion of trust and reputation and identity. There's this idea of ownership of property. What does it mean to own something and transfer that value? And it's kind of like a fundamental reimagining of commerce in a more global capacity, where one doesn't need central entities to control the process. Furthermore, there's a fundamental disintermediation occurring where people are starting for the first time in a long time to be in control of their value and their property and their identity. And in some cases, their personally identifiable information. And what's so exciting to me about this is that we kind of get with a very small team of people relative to impact, 50, 100 people, have a tremendous influence on this new dynamic on how things ought to work. So it's a privilege of a lifetime to be here and to work on these things and make our small mark wherever we can.
That's great stuff. And a lot of that we're actually going to dive into in a lot more detail throughout the interview. But this is interesting, Charles. In my notes here, it says that on top of being the CEO of IOHK, that you are actually the co-founder of some obscure alt shitcoin, I guess, called Ethereum. I've never heard of it.
It's terrible project. Yeah, never do it. No, Ethereum is a great project.
Yeah, I'm kidding, of course.
Right.
It's a long-standing belief of mine that Ethereum is an exceptionally powerful, transformative technology. Some view you in your current work as a usurper. I've got nothing but appreciation for the prominent role you played early in the project and your continued efforts in the blockchain community. But let's dial things back. Why don't you talk about your first introduction to the blockchain?
Okay, so the first time I'd heard about Bitcoin at all was quite early on. I think it was 2010 or 2011. And somebody had sent me via an email a copy of the white paper. And so I looked at it, I read it. I said, that's kind of a really interesting thing. And I said, wow, they got Merkle trees, and this proof of work thing seems to be a really interesting consensus protocol. And from a technological standpoint, it seemed like a pretty novel idea, but I was very skeptical about the economics and very skeptical about them ever being able to get a kind of a scale. So I put it on the back burner. I ended up actually getting a lot of Bitcoins. At one point, I think I may have had 50 or 60,000 of them, but they weren't worth a lot back then. So I gave them all away, and it was probably less than $1,000 of value or something. Can't remember the exact amount, but anyway, it was just a small fun thing. Then around 2013, I started having some more free time, and I remember the Cyprus incident, and Bitcoin went way up, like $200 a coin, and I said, wow, it looks like they've achieved some network effect. And I started very carefully thinking about it, and I said, this is a really interesting space, and so I probably should do something in it. So I remember what an old professor of mine used to say. He said, those who cannot do, teach. So the first thing that I did in the space is I founded the Bitcoin Education Project. And basically what I did is I tried to get all of the people together who were involved in Bitcoin education and create some free content and just put it up on the YouTube and put it up on Udemy and other sources and release it under a Creative Commons license. And the idea was to kind of establish some basic MOOC, a massive open online course that could kind of explain what is Bitcoin, why is it special, and what are the broader implications that this technology is going to have. So I created a class, and I'm a big Peter Sellers fan, so I called the class Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I ended up getting about 50,000 students, which was just unbelievable. So then they sent me emails, because that's what students do, and I got about 5,000 emails, and I answered every single one of them, which, as you can imagine, was a tremendously time-consuming endeavor. At that point, somebody from China approached me and said, hey, I love what you're doing. I'd love to fund you. I have some money. I was a Bitcoin early adopter, and now we're all doing quite well. Kind of wish I hung on to my Bitcoin, because I would be doing quite well too. He said, I'll give you some money to start a Bitcoin venture. And I said, well, that sounds like a grand idea, but I have no idea what to do. And he said, oh, you'll figure it out. You're a bright guy. I said, okay. So I asked my students, I said, what do you think would be the most impactful thing to invest some time and effort in to build a company around? So I got a lot of replies back, but I did get a bimodal distribution. So one group of people said decentralized exchange is really important, because it doesn't matter how decentralized the currency is if the aggregation points where you transaction between fiat and the crypto or digital to digital are regulated exchanges, and basically governments can levy control over those entities. For example, if they don't like Zcash, they can say you can't list Zcash, or they don't like Singular DTV because maybe it's a security in their mind, and they'll just say you need a broker-dealer license to trade it, and they'll say, so Poloniex will drop it, and so forth. So one group of students said, hey, let's do decentralized exchange. And the other group of students said, this is all great and all, but we're never going to replace traditional fiat currencies if we don't have value stability. So what is value stability? It's where you have something where the price today for goods and services is probably about the same as the price tomorrow, which is not the case for something like Bitcoin, because the value goes way up and way down. Like when I came in at 2013, it went up to 248. And then at that point, I think we were down to 80 or 100. So it's like, in under a year, you lose more than 50% of your value. That's not sustainable for things like credit. How can you give a loan when both the lender and the lendee have no idea what the underlying asset's going to be worth? Like, just as a quick example, if I said, Crypto Baron, I'll give you 10 Bitcoin, and this was December 30th, 2012, and you have to pay me back 11, December 30th, 2013, under an ordinary stable currency, that'd be a great deal. And by the way, Bitcoin back then, I think, was $10 or something along those lines. So there was $100 of value at risk. And all of a sudden, you have to pay me back and Bitcoin around December 30th of 2013, I think, was around over $1,000 a coin. So you have to pay me back $11,000. Let's say we made the same deal 1 year later, I would actually win that bet, because Bitcoin went down considerably that year. So the other group of students said, hey, let's do a value stable currency. And I said, okay, it would be really cool if we can roll these two things up. And I felt that like if we could do these two things together, it would make the cryptocurrency movement very resilient and invincible. And so I remembered a Helmsley poem, Invictus. And so I said, Project Invictus. And I launched a Bitcoin talk thread. And the very first person to post on it was Bytemaster, which is, people know, that's Dan Larimer. And he had this idea of BitShares percolating in the back of his head. And so we kind of partnered together, and the Chinese put money into a company we set up in Virginia, down in Virginia Tech at the Corporate Research Center. And I got BitShares up to a point where it was ready to launch. And Dan and I kept fighting and fighting because we both have very strong opinions on things. And at some point, I just took a buyout and left and went on to go do Ethereum with Vitalik. And then Dan went on to build out the BitShares ecosystem and brought in delegated proof of stake and the Graphene platform, and later did Steem, and now I guess he's doing EOS. So he's been very successful in propagating these ideas. We didn't quite solve the value stable currency, but we did get the conversation started. And there was a lot of ventures that have come afterwards, like MakerDAO and Tether. And there's a lot of thought that's going into that. And in terms of decentralized exchange, there's certainly a lot of thought that's going into that as well. And I think we made a lot of positive contributions there. But what most people know me for these days is Ethereum. So let's talk about that. Ethereum was really the accidental project. It wasn't intended to be this 800-pound gorilla that was going to go take over the world. Rather, what happened was that after I left BitShares, I was kind of looking for something to do. And Anthony Diorio had contacted me to do some educational content for the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada, because at the time he was the director, and he knew me from the Bitcoin Education Project. And Anthony's like, hey, let's do something together. And so we started working, and he was a great guy, kind of sharp elbows, but that's his style, and that's how he gets things done. And he's very good at getting things done, especially if you look at how fast Jax has grown. And he said, hey, by the way, there's this brilliant kid that shows up to the Toronto Bitcoin meetups we have at Decentral, named Vitalik, and he's got this crazy white paper. I can't make heads or tails of it. Can you read it and let me know what you think? I said, sure. So I looked at the paper, and it was basically like a virtual machine taped on as an overlay protocol on top of Primecoin. It wasn't even a standalone cryptocurrency. And basically the idea was to add smart contracts to a cryptocurrency. Now, the reason why Vitalik wanted to do this wasn't because he had this grand scheme of building a decentralized world. It was more a project of frustration for him, because he was a core developer for Color Coins as well as Mastercoin. And he was getting into all this trouble trying to make the damn things work. And every little feature or functionality was just this enormous effort. And he's like, why can't programming for blockchains be like programming for the web, where you have JavaScript with the browser and you have some degree of programmability? So Vitalik wanted to attach a programming language to a blockchain and give people a much easier time building things like Namecoin or Color Coins and so forth. So it's a really novel idea, but the problem was that we didn't really know how to execute it. So I said, this is a really interesting paper. I think we can do something with it, but we need to kind of start building a team. And Anthony said, well, we already have kind of a team. There was 4 other people at the time. There was Mihai Alicia, Vitalik, Amir Shetreat, and Anthony. And I was number 5 in that group. And at the same time,
sorry to interrupt before Gavin and Jeff even.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. So what happened at the same time, Vitalik had set up a Skype group, and a bunch of people started joining the Skype group. So I don't know exactly when Gav of York, that's Gavin's name, his Skype handle, joined, but I think it was around November or December of 2013. So I think we probably joined right around the same time, but he wasn't in any of the initial meetings. Instead, what he was doing was just kind of figuring out how the heck would you implement this. Now, meanwhile, Jeff had a Skype handle called Obscurin, and Jeff was actually anonymous. We didn't know who he was, because he was actually a core developer of Mastercoin at the time. So I guess he was kind of hedging his bets, and he was having a lot of fun building like a Go version of it. Well, anyway, after we started growing, because every week we would grow by like 100 people in the Skype room, and it became very clear that this was something special. And Vitalik released a new version of the white paper where this was a standalone cryptocurrency, still very kludgy. It was like proof of work with a cork coin style distribution where most of the currency would be mined in 3 years. And it wasn't very perfect from that sense, but it was much, much better, and it actually looked like it could work. So at that point, Anthony said, you know what? We got to make some decisions here. So let's all get together. So Anthony went ahead and rented a beach house in Miami, and this was in January of 2014. And he said, all right, let's just have all the people who are going to come, and let's all meet each other, see if we're assholes or if we like each other, and see what we can do together and kind of figure out what this project is going to be all about. And at the same time, we'll go and present Ethereum at the North American Bitcoin Conference that was being held at Miami at the same time, and see what the community reception was. So we all just kind of bought our tickets and flew in there. And this was the first time that I met Gavin in person. Jeff didn't come. Mihai wanted to come, but he couldn't get a visa because he's Romanian, and it's sometimes hard to get visas on short notice. But we did pipe them in a few times, and Vitalik and Mihai know each other really well because they did Bitcoin Magazine together. And the rest of us went there. I think there's probably about 20 or 30 people who ended up going to that beach house. So we all got to know each other. We all hit it off. It was really fun. I really enjoyed the conversations. Some were philosophical, some were business-oriented, some were technological. And then the moment of truth was when we went to the North American Bitcoin Conference, and we did two presentations. One presentation was done by Vitalik, and the other was a debate, which is still actually up on YouTube. The debate I did with David Johnston and Dan Larimer. So anyway, Vitalik's presentation was incredibly well received, and my debate was well received. And it became very clear that we had something tremendously special, that the community really wanted this, that the idea of having a programming language on a blockchain and being able to create smart contracts, and to a greater extent, this whole DAO philosophy that we first started talking about at Invictus, we called it a DAC. Stan Larimer actually wrote one of the first papers, and very shortly after, Vitalik wrote some papers on DAOs in Bitcoin Magazine. But the idea had been floating around since Mike Hearn presented it at the Turing Festival, I think in 2011 or 12. So, this whole notion of an autonomous company running in the web, which has no jurisdiction but can have legally enforceable contracts, was like super cool. And the community was just like on fire for this type of stuff. Also, you have to understand the environment that we were in. Bitcoin went from $100 to over $1,200 in like a month. And everything was just crazy. Like, hype was at maximum level. Dogecoin just came out and everybody was making money on it. Next had just come out and everybody was making money on it. So it was a very hot environment, and Ethereum kind of looked like the sexiest, most promising of all projects. So we agreed to kind of develop a forked strategy. So we would break ourselves apart into kind of three different groups, and each group would handle a particular dimension of the project. One group would worry about getting the project funded long term. One group would worry about the underlying technology and getting it to a state of maturity where it was reasonable to fund the project. And one group would kind of be like marketing and community advertising and business development, go talk to everybody and see what kind of strategic partnerships we could do. So I felt that the single most important component was the legal structure and the ability to get the company to the project to a fundable state. So I took that plank. Gavin and Vitalik took the development side, and then Anthony and others kind of took the biz dev and marketing, along with Joe, and they just went around at a conference after conference and did interview after interview and kind of built up the hype and got people excited and brought in a great community. About a month later, we also hired Stefan Tual because he was running a website that was very pro-Ethereum, and we thought he would be a good guy. Go figure. And he came in and took over community management as well. And we had a very aggressive meetup group strategy that he helped execute. So I moved to Switzerland, and we ended up setting up a GmbH there. And we worked really hard. We got tax rulings, and we talked to lawyers very extensively. We also had a parallel legal effort in the United States where we talked to a U.S. law firm about writing a more likely than not opinion about exactly what would the Ether sale constitute in terms of required regulation and so forth. So I spent months of my life working on that, and it was very tedious technical work and a lot of hard meetings that were long. Like in Switzerland, some of them lasted 12 hours. You're just one after another after another. Gavin, in the meantime, formalized the EVM. He produced the yellow paper, and it was ready by the Toronto conference in April of 2014. And Anthony and Joe and Amir and others, they really killed it. They went to Silicon Valley. They went to the Paul Snow's conference down in Texas and talked to a lot of people, and they got a lot of people very excited about Ethereum. So at the end of all of that, we converged upon Anthony's conference in Toronto, and then we had to start making some decisions about what the future of Ethereum was going to be, because we had gotten to a point where the hype was there, the technology was there, and we had divergent options on the business side. So there's kind of, how do we want to run it and how do we want to fund it? So how do we want to fund it? We had two options. One was to take VC money, and at that point there was certainly a good market for it. Blockstream at the same time was raising capital, and I believe they got a $26 million investment. And so Silicon Valley was totally prepared to put equivalent amounts of money into a for-profit company if it looked like it had something very competitive. And frankly, it would have been one of the best investments of all time in Silicon Valley had that been done. So we knew the VC money was there, and we also knew that we could do a crowd sale. And the only question was, how would that be done? What entity would it be executed? And so forth. So we started those conversations in Toronto very heavily. And my opinion was that the project had grown too large. We had people in 5 different countries working for Ethereum. A lot of people had brought in their friends. We didn't have clear contracts or command and control. It was a very flat structure. Even though I was voted the CEO by the founders, because there's 8 founders at that point, it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? I didn't have an official employment contract or any mandate of what I'm supposed to do or so forth. I was just trying to be useful. So I said, what we probably need to do is start a for-profit company, take a VC investment, centralize in Switzerland, and turtle up and build the protocol over a 6 months to a year cycle. Because Bitcoin's kind of in a downtrend, and it'd be better to launch it at the bottom of the market instead of right at the top. B, because the legal risk would be tremendously lower. C, because everybody would have to go through due diligence then. I think we had probably over 200 people floating around the Ethereum spectrum, and we didn't know basically these people's backgrounds, if they were going to go and do their own things, what the liabilities were, what they'd been promised. It just grew so organically and so rapidly. The other option was to just set up a foundation and have that foundation conduct a crowd sale and then use it to fund a collection of companies to build up the ecosystem. And let anybody who wants to participate and have a horizontal power structure, except for the fiduciaries of the foundation. So these were, viable options. Both of them could do things. My concern with the foundation approach was that if we went down that road, we'd have brain death, because there was no equity and nothing chaining people or vesting to this foundation outside of the appreciation of, let's say, the value of Ether, which they'll get regardless. There's no reason for them to stay. So they're all going to scatter and start their own companies, and we would lose a lot of value then. So, it's the debate is, do you start the EF and then consensus, or do you start consensus and then the EF? And this was kind of the quintessential debate. Well, anyway, we fought and fought and fought. And then June of 2014, we converged upon Switzerland to make the final decision. And in a boardroom brawl, my side lost, and I left, and Amir Shatrit left, and the devs won. And it became a foundation. And they went ahead a month later and did the crowd sale. And then immediately sent some of the money over to a new company in Germany, I think, or London. I can't remember where they incorporated. I believe it was called FDev. And Gavin and Jeff and Vitalik kind of ruled the roost and built Ethereum and launched it. And then most of the founders eventually left and started their own companies. So that was the extent of my involvement in Ethereum. Some of it was just helping corral people together. Some of it was philosophical advice and strategic advice. And some of it was a lot of hardcore business dev work where we were trying really to keep everything together and make sure that which we had created that had value would not just scatter to the wind, and the project would not grow too quickly for its own good or become too fragmented for its own good and gradually break apart. But anyway, that's what happened there. Then I kind of went into the hinterlands for a little bit. We're kind of walking through history. I went into the hinterlands for a little bit, and I was pretty pissed off because I thought that Ethereum was $1 billion company, which I was right about, and I really felt like so much more could have been done if things were just done differently. That's my opinion. And so I went back to math for a bit, and I was just studying things like analytic number theory, and I was looking at some old problems that I had in my notes from years back. And I was trying to make a decision, like, what the hell do I want to do with my life? And everybody kept calling me and saying, you should come back to the cryptocurrency space. I still had a lot of friends from the Ethereum days, but I was kind of burnt out. I was like, I'm 0-2. I'm not so good at partnering with people. And I said, no, you're great. Just partner with the right people. So the pivot point for me was that I got invited to do a TED Talk in Bermuda. on cryptocurrencies. And I tried to actually kill that talk. I didn't want to go, but they kept making it sweeter and sweeter. Like, they will fly you out on first class and get you a nice hotel room and everything. I said, oh, it's fine, I'll go. So I went to Bermuda, I gave my presentation, and it was so well received. I said, all right, you know what, that's it. We'll bring the old crew back together, and the people that I can work with, and I'll start another company. But then I had to kind of decide, like...
I just wanted to quick insert. I've seen that presentation. It is absolutely terrific. Make sure that you go watch his TED Talk if you haven't.
By the way, I didn't prepare it. I wrote it the night before the TED Talk. This is like how anti-presentation I was. So like the night I arrived in Bermuda, and Nick Traub, the guy who put it on, he's like, can I see your presentation? I said, I haven't written it yet. And he had his face went white, and he's like, you haven't written it yet. This is TED. You can't just do this. And I was like, no, don't worry about it. It's okay. I'll think of something in the hotel room and put it down. And that was a lot of fun. I thought I was just going to be able to wing it, and like I was going to be the best speaker or something. But actually, the guy who spoke before me had spent 20 years on Easter Island studying those giant moai heads. And he actually even built one in Hawaii and figured out how they moved them. And they were walking the head.
What?
It was like the coolest presentation in the world. And
is this the big scoop? Was it not aliens? Are you trying to say Easter Island was man-made ingenuity?
They even have a YouTube video, man. You can, and actually, there's still probably his presentation on the web somewhere. But it was like one of the coolest presentations, and I was the poor schmuck who had to go after him. And everybody's like, "Okay, what's this guy got?" I was like, "God, I kind of wish I prepared more for this presentation." But
yeah, you send that presentation before you to that Ancient Aliens guy. He's jumping straight off a bridge.
Right. All right. So anyway, I did that, and I brought the old crew back together, and Jeremy Wood and I, Jeremy worked with me at Ethereum. We decided to start another company. And I said, well, you know, I've done this enough that if I'm going to do another company, damn it, I'm going to do the company I want to do. So I said, I really like building cryptocurrencies and doing research. It's a lot of fun. So I said, let's build a factory for cryptocurrencies, a company that makes them for a living. But not just like implement something, like not just good engineers, but actually let's do protocols as well. Let's actually be researchers. So Jeremy and I said, well, why don't we create a synthesis between research and development? Where on the research side, we start from first principles and we integrate ourselves in universities itself. We hire cryptographers, we retain professors, and we do peer-reviewed research, actual peer-reviewed research, not going to a cryptocurrency conference, but going to like a proper crypto conference, like Crypto. Or Eurocrypt or ACNS or something like this. And then let's build on the engineering side, people who do high assurance software. That's a very particular type of software. So we're talking about formal specification and formal verification. So you're talking about actual computer proofs, and you're talking about rigorous mathematical definitions of what the software is supposed to do. This is only done in military software or aerospace software. Like if you're NASA, you can't, if your Mars rover has the blue screen of death, you can't go kick it and have it reboot. Damn thing's on Mars. So you just have to accept that it's gone. So it's probably good to make sure that before you shipped it, the software is right. Similarly for satellites, similarly when you're on an airplane, you're looking at that Rolls-Royce engine on the side or GE engine, you're hoping that it's not going to have the blue screen of death and shut down. You want the engine to keep running. So there are software techniques and methodologies, and they're quite good. And there's even languages like Coq, it's COQ, it's a French language, and Isabelle, and techniques like Liquid Haskell that can give you a high degree of assurance that your software is correct. So we said, in addition to being good developers and doing things in functional languages with Haskell, this weird academic language that nobody sane should use, let's also do high assurance software. And so let's build a beautiful pipeline where we start from first principles, we start with peer review, we start with the hard problems of cryptocurrency, and we can write papers, peer review those papers, and actually prototype them and formally specify them and then implement them in a functional language and use a high order logic to verify the implementation is correct. No one's ever done that in the cryptocurrency space. So that was the core idea of IOHK. So we said, fuck it, let's do it. So we founded it in 2015. We built ourselves up. Now we operate with people in 10 countries. We have 70 employees. Revenue-wise, we're doing great. And we have written several wonderful papers like Ouroboros, which is a provably secure proof of stake, has been submitted and accepted to Crypto 17. I think it's the first proof of stake protocol to be accepted at a mainstream cryptography conference. We created a new random number generator that's based on Schoenmaker's PVSS coin flipping scheme. which was originally quadratic time. We actually have a linear time version. We've submitted it. It's also been accepted for peer review. And we also have one of the largest Haskell teams, I think, in the world. We have 25 full-time Haskell developers. We even have one of the guys who created Haskell working with the company, Professor Phil Wadler, who works part-time and helps us with language design. And we have 3 research partnerships. We are partnered with University of Edinburgh, Tokyo Tech, and University of Athens, where we actually have our physical personnel in the university itself, working alongside professors there to do peer-reviewed research. So the experiment worked, and iWhichK has turned out to be a tremendous company, and I'm having a hell of a lot of fun running it.
Yeah, absolutely. You recently just brought on a game theory Oxford professor to contribute to the project too, right?
Yeah, Elias. He wrote The Price of Anarchy, and he's won a Gödel Prize, and that's a step down from the Turing Prize, so it's a very prestigious award. But basically, he was one of the first guys to actually start saying, listen, these internet protocols that people are developing, they need to have incentives thought out. So it's not about optimal running of the protocol, it's more about understanding people and what their incentives and motivations are going to be to run these types of protocols. And then if you can understand that, you can develop a much more resilient web. Now, this was in the 90s, well before BitTorrent or cryptocurrencies or any of these things. So in many ways, his research kind of inspired the seed of thought behind, maybe we should start thinking about tokenizing things, or maybe we should start thinking about why Bob and Alice are actually going to run our protocol. So we brought him on board to actually be a mechanism design expert. So we have all these protocols like treasury systems and proof of stake and other such things where you got to pay people to do something or punish people not to do particular things. But you just can't do that willy-nilly. The problem with our space is that most of the parameters we've selected are magic numbers. They're just picked out of a hat. We hope they work. They're not really incentivized or structured in a way that there's some rigorous thought that's connected to a model that may actually provide some value. So Elias is going to help us add some academic rigor from the algorithmic game theory side to our protocols. The advantage, unique advantage of working with him is that most game theorists tend to be stronger in economics and less so in computer science. Or maybe they tend to be very mathematically inclined, but they're not very good on the computer science side. He's actually really good on the comp sci side. He's also at Oxford. He's a tenured professor there, and he's got a very large research group. So it's nice to be able to pick the brain of that group and work alongside them and co-author some great papers. I think we're the only company, though, by the way, that actually has managed to get people in Oxford and Cambridge. There's some rivalry between those two schools. We actually have
Yes.
Lawrence Paulson and his grad student Colin working on a project where we're checking the proofs in some of our papers, and then we have Elias working on some game theory stuff. So maybe we can create some academic harmony, and bring the two universities back together after 800 years.
We'll see. I think the odds are pretty stacked against you. For anybody that doesn't know,
It's been 800 years.
Myriad of applications, from everything from biology to the Cuban Missile Crisis, in fact. But it essentially just boils down to the decision making, down to logic through rational conflict interaction.
Right.
So that's a little background on that. Charles, it's definitely time to talk about the DAO hack.
Yeah, so I never thought I was ever going to go back to Ethereum. I thought I was done. Ethereum's closed. Every now and then I'd be snarky on Reddit or something, and people say, "Oh, screw Charles, he's a bad guy." And I'm like, whatever. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, my snarky Reddit, it's great.
Snarky Reddit and Screw Charles. I've seen both.
Yeah, well, I'm just so loved. But no, anyway, besides being crypto Rodney Dangerfield, I never honestly thought I'd come back to Ethereum. I thought maybe 20 years in the future we'd do some reunion thing, and after all the wars have been fought, we either won or lost. But outside of that, probably not. But what happened was that basically one of the guys close to Ethereum, Stefan Tual, formed a company called Slockit, and they created basically a decentralized venture capital firm. And they said, hey, look at this amazing thing we've done. And they made a lot of bold claims, and they raised a hell of a lot of money, and it turned out that there was a flaw, and that flaw was exploited. Well, this is nothing new. There was a flaw with Mt. Gox. There was a flaw with a lot of things, and a lot of money's gotten stolen in the past or lost in the past. There's plenty of wallet makers who fucked up and they accidentally burnt tokens or didn't preserve private keys and lost their money. This is the danger of using cryptocurrency, and part of the social contract is when you make mistakes, there's no one to show up to bail you out. One of the problems, though, was that the people who started the DAO kind of had some close relationships with the EF, and it wasn't clear that if the DAO was to fail, what legal and regulatory impact that would have on the broader Ethereum ecosystem. Whereas things like Mt. Gox failing with Bitcoin, Karpeles goes to jail, we're all fine, but Bitcoin lives on. This was a back door that could cascade into the EF potentially, and basically for the next 2 or 3 years, potentially longer, cause a lot of problems for them. So I can understand the political motivation to say maybe we need to reverse this and kind of say this is the only time we're going to do backsies, but let's never do it again. But the problem is that when you take other people's money with a social contract, you have to be completely honest about that. And when you say code is law, illegality, code can't fail, unstoppable applications, and you put in bold red letters that if you do something, you are held accountable for your actions, and then you make a decision to abandon that philosophy because of regulatory or legal convenience this one time, in my view, you've completely divorced yourself from everything that makes cryptocurrency special. I mean, 2008 is a great example where the government says, okay, we're going to bail people out and we're going to fix all this stuff up and we won't get involved again. But we have to get involved this time to save the free market and save everything. But the problem is that they just keep saying it. They said it with the SNL crisis. They said it with long-term capital management. They said it with the financial crisis, the mortgage-backed security issue. And it's going to be another crisis. They'll do the exact same damn thing. The reality is the minute that you know you can cross that river, it becomes too tempting to cross it again, especially when you go from millions to billions to hundreds of billions of dollars of people's value, and you go from you're a bad guy to being sued to going to jail in terms of the cost of not doing that. And if you have a small centralized group of actors who have the ability to do that, then they're going to do it because people are people. And the point of cryptocurrencies is they're not people. They don't have our values. They don't have our philosophy. They don't care when grandma loses money. They don't care when people are stolen. Over $4 billion worth of Bitcoin has been stolen over the history of Bitcoin. About 10% of the supply. If you add up all the thefts and account for the increase in market cap, it's a big number. Yet Bitcoin's still here. It's still got strong principles. It's still got a lot of adherence. People are still using it. People are building businesses on top of it. So the point is that you pick the moral high ground. So when I heard that they were potentially thinking about rolling things back, I felt like they had defrauded the people who put the money in and a lot of people who worked their asses off to build up the ecosystem. And it wasn't a matter of me thinking that if they forked that it would destroy Ethereum and somehow Ethereum would not be successful. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. I think a fork actually made Ethereum much more appealing to banks and enterprise actors and governments because they realized that there was a consumer protection component now and they could intervene when necessary, if necessary, for the greater good of society, potentially. And the community may be on board with that. And sure enough, post-fork, the EEA has been established. The value's gone from $1 billion to I think, what is it, 20 billion now, a lot. And there's a huge amount of enterprise and government love. Even the PBOC is saying that maybe this is a good idea. But I felt that betrayed what we were trying to do. Always being the guy in the minority and always being the guy on the outside, I philosophically supported ETC, didn't expect it to go anywhere, thought it was going to get killed in a few days. But when it got listed, got developer support, and it got momentum, it looked like it actually would become permanent, and I'm very glad that I got involved. And frankly, I don't care if it was $1 or $1 billion, I'd still come in and make the same decision because it was about giving people who felt like they had been lied to or betrayed their original social contract and honoring that social contract. So that was then, and that where are we at today for ETC? Well, you can't build a movement on a protest, and you can't build something sustainable by defining yourself by what you're not. You have to lead. So now that the community is stabilized, we have 2 independent development teams, one I control and one that is more community-centric. We have good community management. We have a podcast, Let's Talk ETC, that's done by Christian Severino and Carlo. Carlos is also doing a very good job broadcasting the message. We have a great community now. it's getting to the point where we can actually start diverging and actually having discussions about what does the divergence need to look like. We've already had several hard forks just to clean things up, like get rid of replay TAC, change the monetary policy to cap it, make it much more Bitcoin-like than Ethereum's current monetary policy. And now we're going to have some discussions about what is the future consensus algorithm? How are we going to achieve scalability? How are we going to have much more secure smart contracts? What core programming languages are going to be used to create applications on ETC? How do we get ETC to talk to other blockchains? These types of things. And because there's many different ways to do these things, the decisions that our community make will ultimately be very different in many cases than the decisions ETH makes. And you'll see the chains kind of diverge very considerably, and then they'll tend to be specialized and good for particular applications. But one thing ETC will never do is violate its principles. If I recommended rolling back a transaction, or anybody else in the community, pitchforks and torches would appear and we'd be kicked out in 20 minutes. So that's one guarantee that you get. ETC is basically Ethereum with Bitcoin style ethics, and Ethereum is its own thing, which is fine. And if you bought Ether, you can't really complain because you actually got positions in both chains. So the social contract is preserved, and now you got this other thing that's going on that's tremendously successful.
Now, you mentioned the social contract, and for you, that's the code is law philosophy.
Well, no, it wasn't just me.
Other philosophy
I mean, there's videos of him on YouTube saying illegality. He invented new words for it. And the Ethereum core team was perfectly comfortable going for over 2 years talking about unstoppable applications and saying how we're not going to roll things back, and it's going to run the way it's written. In fact, I remember there was a great paper from Elaine Shih, The Ring of Gyges, which talks about all these illegal smart contracts that can be used for bad things like assassination markets and other things. And he'd ask the Ethereum community, and they say, that's not our responsibility. We don't take a position. The protocol doesn't care about the code, just like Bitcoin. If somebody uses Bitcoin to fund terrorists or buy child porn, it's not the responsibility of the miners or the protocol developers, because it's a neutral platform that doesn't care about the transactions. And the whole philosophy was that whatever your smart contract is that happens to live on the protocol, that contract, whatever it is, we don't care. The protocol will run it. That was the original philosophy. And it was incredibly crystal clear. Long after I left, they were pumping it, raising money on it, getting hype on it, getting developers on it, holding meetup groups about it, doing YouTube presentations, doing DevCon presentations, the founders that remained. So, it wasn't my interpretation, just use their own words. And we would not have such a large community in ETC and be $1.5 billion and have people willing to work for free, because no one's getting paid right now, in ETC dev outside of donations. And I pay my guys, but that's a loss leader. I don't make any money on it if we didn't believe in that social contract. So with all due respect, no, I don't think it was just a small difference of opinion. I think it was a marketing message that people accepted, they raised money on, they built a community on, and when it became inconvenient, they threw away because of legal and regulatory reasons.
Absolutely. I'm pretty Switzerland on this issue. I understand Vitalik and the massive success of Ethereum behind, and the argument of intent, and the argument that this is clearly a bug. Obviously, it's outside the Ethereum protocol. It was in the, but I also understand the very firm, stoic code is law approach. Obviously, I
but there's
firmly agree with you.
The overlay software, and there's a bug in the protocol. Bitcoin fixes bugs in the protocol. There was an error with Bitcoin way back, like 2010 or 2011, where you could manipulate Bitcoin script in just the right way and create billions of Bitcoins. Obviously, you fixed that. It was fixed quickly. That's a problem with the protocol, and it violates the social contract. There was a transaction malleability problem with Mt. Gox's software, allowed hackers to come in and steal all the Bitcoins. That's Mark's fault. That's Mt. Gox's fault. And yeah, a lot of people lost any money. Some of the Bitcoin core developers had over $1 million each in Mt. Gox. They still did not advocate a rollback, and they lost millions of dollars of their own money. So I think that principles are expensive and they're hard. And I don't care if there was an intent. I'm pretty sure Mt. Gox had an intent not to be hacked and had an intent for their software to behave in a certain way, and probably did. And I absolutely know that the guys at Slockit had an intent for the DAO to work. They were trying to build their brand and reputation on it. And if it doesn't, it's a disaster for them. So I appreciate that. But the problem here is, crypto, that you can't go ahead and advertise a certain type of development experience that says you are 100% accountable for your actions. And the people that invest in you and work with you are at 100% risk. There is no government. There is no fallback. There is no guy that's going to come and save you if that guy's a scammer, or if the code doesn't work, or you lose your private keys. This is the world we've lived in the cryptocurrency space since 2009. It's the Wild West. It's a harsh one. It's like saying you're going to go out in the desert. You got to provision your supplies. And if you run out of water, you dehydrate and die. That's on you. You didn't bring enough water. You didn't prepare yourself properly. But you're told that before you go into the desert. Similarly, this is the desert. Now, desert's got a lot of magic in it. It's got gemstones here, and perhaps there's an oasis and maybe long forgotten city. So there's magical, amazing things that you can accomplish and see in this world. But it's a dangerous world. The minute that you say, okay, well, certain people, they get a do-over because it's just, it's too big and that person's too important, or it has too big of a consequence, then what you've basically said is, well, this guy who goes out in the desert because he's a celebrity, I'm going to send the helicopter in and rescue him and prevent him from dehydrating. Then what happens to all the other people who died in the desert and dehydrated? What the hell did they die for? So what's the cutoff point? Is it $100 million? Is it $10 million? Is it $5 million? I mean, how would you feel if you had two swimming pools, and one of the swimming pools a child falls in, the other swimming pool a child falls in, and the lifeguard in swimming pool A saves the child, and swimming pool B says, nah, not today, immutability, code is law, and lets that child drown. And they say, well, but the child in the pool A, that was Bill Gates's kid, so it's way too important. We get sued, government investigation. The child B, that was some illegal immigrant's kid. Who cares? No one can do anything about it. That's the moral hazard in the most concise of terms with what intervention does, because you have no standard for when you intervene. It's all about political connections or outcome, and then the people you didn't intervene for, those people lose everything. But why? What did they gain? I mean, at least when you have principles, you can say, I saved no one. And we all know that then. And we all took the risk. There's a cave that people love to go and scuba dive in, and it's a very dangerous cave. It's in South America. And every year it kills dozens of scuba divers, but it's a beautiful cave. And they run out of oxygen, and they get lost, and they die in the cave. And they have this little sign, and it has a skull on it, and it says, if you go in this cave, you're probably going to die. It says it in multiple languages, but people every year, they still go, because that's that. And when somebody calls and says, hey, my friends went into the cave, and they haven't come back, the authorities won't show up. They said, we put the sign, people knew the risk. If they did that, well, we'll hope for the best. And that is the world of cryptocurrency. Ethereum has exited that world and has now entered some sort of mid-ground. And I don't know what that is, but it's not crypto land. It's something different. Doesn't mean it can't be successful. Ripple's tremendously successful. It's at $11 billion. The market's growing like crazy. They have a lot of enterprise customers. I have tremendous respect for Arthur and for Chris, and I think they've built one of the finest companies in the space. And I also have tremendous respect for the people at the Ethereum Foundation, for the people at Consensus, and I think they do tremendously good work. They have a great guy at EF called Yoichi Harai. He does a formal verification work. It's some of the best work and most systematic and rigorous work you'll see in the space. Okay? But I will not call that then a cryptocurrency, because I think what's happened is it abandoned everything that makes a cryptocurrency a cryptocurrency. It's a different kind of cave, and it's lost any moral mandate.
It's hard to argue with a lot of that, especially essentially in my past, I have been Nigerian princed at about 100 Ether, and I quite frankly, I'd love to have that forked back to me, especially like the more that Ether rises. But that being said, Charles, I think this question is a rough one, but I have to ask it. So there's a lot of people out there that do believe that Ethereum Classic is essentially an attack on the legitimacy of Ethereum by Bitcoin maximalists, often specifically the Silberts are mentioned. So how do you respond to this? Obviously, you're very passionate about the subject, so I'm looking forward to your input.
Well, you know, whatever. Okay, so let's just look at where it was and where it is. And so it doesn't really matter what the thing existed as it was when it was created. If you really think about it, it was a protest. And there's sure as hell a lot of people in that protest movement who had a lot of reason to be angry with Ethereum. Okay, so there was people who bought Ether and they felt like they'd been lied to. There were Bitcoin maximalists who probably thought this was a good avenue to damage Ethereum and prevent it from overtaking Bitcoin. There were probably people there who said, boy, I missed the Ethereum boat, and if I can join the ETC boat, if this thing can overtake it, maybe I can get the asset at a tremendously underpriced value. Whatever the hell it is, that's what it was. It was a very chaotic and unstable time. I was in the camp that felt the social contract had been violated. And I came in and said, I'm going to put in developers and community management, and we're going to try to be good custodians of this project and help it along and get it past the crisis point. So now we're past the crisis point. A lot of the short-term actors have left. A lot of people on the Ethereum side tried to kill it by dumping their Ether Classic, which they got for free. And there was even tweets from certain people saying, free money. I can't wait to see the price go down. I can't wait to see this thing collapse. There were a lot of people said, use the trademark to shut it down. A lot of people said we should sue Barry Silbert. It was a pretty vicious attack from the Ethereum side. And sure hell, there was a vicious attack coming from the ETC side to the Ethereum side. It was both ways. I'll acknowledge that. That's fair. But we are where we're at today. And what's happened is Ethereum Classic has stabilized. It's built an independently big community that's very passionate, and it's looking at the world a little differently. And the division is less about let's kill Ethereum and more about we actually have differences of opinion about how smart contracts should be run. I'll give you a great example. One of them is proof of work versus proof of stake. There are a lot of people who don't think proof of stake works. I happen to believe it does because we created a protocol that shows it does, Ouroboros, and we're very happy with it, and it's received great reviews. But there are some people that think proof of stake is a scam, or it doesn't work, or it's just for whatever reason can't be used with a cryptocurrency. And they think Ethereum transitioning to a proof of stake destroys what makes Ethereum special. Where do they go? There's nowhere to go right now. Bitcoin's not going to become Ethereum. So Ethereum Classic is actually a great place for them to go. So that's one of the people to come at. You know, another thing is the smart contract model. Let's really think carefully about the philosophy of move fast and break things. You can't go and say, we're going to move at the speed of light and give you guys all these new features and go, you know, prototype and build stuff, but then say when you fail, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're going to die in the desert. That's not really fair. So a lot of people in the ETC side say, if we're going to have code as law, then we got to make sure that before you go into the desert, there's a really good supermarket that's got great supplies. And we're going to make sure you're as provisioned as possible. So you have the highest probability of success. You have that extra air tank on your back when you go into the cave. So what does that mean? It means tearing apart the EVM and modeling it with K-semantics. It means the Sputnik VM project that ETC Dev is working on. It means new programming languages, which bring in concepts from type theory and functional programming languages to allow you to write contracts that have a much, much higher probability of not failing. Okay? Well, that's a mandate that we have to satisfy if we're going to have this kind of philosophy. That is a mandate that you don't necessarily have to have if you're in the Ethereum world, because maybe you'll get a bailout, maybe it'll fork, maybe mutability is coming down the pipe. Who knows? My point is that there's natural divergence points that are now based upon philosophy and technology, not about let's kill ETH or let's kill ETC. Those days are over. No one won. ETC survived despite the best efforts of the people who wanted to kill it, and ETH survived despite the best efforts of the people in the ETC community. That war's over. You know, there's no animosity on my side anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the Ether buyer won. Why? Because Ether Classic is now worth more than what Ethereum was worth at the DAO fork. So it's like, even if that's your whole thing, you've broken even. You're feeling good about it. You got something. And it's a stable, great community that believes in the original principles. And let's say that you're on the other side of the fence. Vitalik's doing a great job with his ecosystem, as is Joe Lubin and the EEA. They've really brought something special together. So no matter what side of the fence you're on, you're doing great. You know, everybody won. So why the hell do we even fight anymore? And it's just like, let it go. and then let's make each other better. Because by having a place for miners to go during a proof of stake transition, it means that there's less contention for Ethereum to execute and move to proof of stake, because people who disagree have a place to go in a peaceful way and still profit. B, we both have mutual benefit, mutual interest, namely with formal verification and getting a better smart contract model, especially when sharding comes. So there's a lot of potential for crosstalk and cross-research. We're working on the same classes of problems. We're ultimately going to have different philosophies about how to solve them, but just the conversations alone can benefit us. So one of my hopes is that this gulf can be bridged at some point, and we can start talking to each other again. Obviously, we can't do that if people are calling us a scam and we're horrible human beings and saying Barry Shilbert and all this other stuff. But that's only a small minority, to be honest, of people in the Ethereum world. Most people just don't care. They're like, yeah, whatever. The Classic was a thing. Or some people actually like Classic now because they woke up and suddenly they had these extra tokens that they didn't buy. They just appeared, and now they're actually worth a lot of money. And they probably made quite a bit on it. And they're like, oh, well, why should I hate these guys? They just made me a bunch of money. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So ultimately, I think that we have more in common and we can do better things together. And frankly, we can grow in our own verticals and never actually have to fight each other. I don't believe ETC will harm or hurt Ethereum anymore at this point. And frankly, I think Bitcoin's maximalists have already put their eggs in a different basket. They've put their eggs in the Rootstock basket, which is actually a very legitimate threat to ETC. Bitcoin's getting very competitive all of a sudden. You got SegWit coming in, you got Rootstock coming in. We've created a new sidechain scheme, which we're going to be publishing very soon, which massively improves the sidechains model. There's a lot of good things coming down the pipe that are very pro Bitcoin, and it's going to get competitive. And ETC and Bitcoin are going to have a hell of a fight. But they don't, ETH and Bitcoin are going to have a hell of a fight. I don't think ETC is going to get involved in that at all. We're just going to have our own little thing and be on the side and, have fun in that space. And I think we'll be very competitive in that and let the Titans fight each other.
That's terrific. So much good stuff. There's a lot to unpack in that. First of all, you saying no animosity. I obviously don't speak for the entire blockchain community, but I personally would love to see both chains working together in a complementary manner instead of just trying to compete in FUD campaigns, trying to delegitimize each other. So obviously that's you. Have you considered just calling ETC silver to Ethereum's gold like Litecoin did? That seems to have stemmed a lot of animosity there.
Yeah, but that implies that ETC will always be smaller than
right.
My hope is that ETC continues to grow and it becomes its own like Leviathan in its domain.
Yes, and I want to talk about more about the technological innovation and some of the differentiators that you're looking at for Ethereum Classic. I also do want to dive more into SegWit, into Lightning Network, into Rootstock in a little bit. But for now, what I want to talk to you is about value. I'm big on this. Most certainly is not a bubble. We are just scratching the surface on the potential of what this market is going to be. It's not going to be measured in the 100 billions. It's going to be measured in the many, many trillions when all is said and done. That's my own personal opinion. About value, how a blockchain derives its value, and even how a entrance to the private blockchain increase the value of the public blockchain.
Sure. Okay, so I've held a long-standing belief that the value of any cryptocurrency has nothing to do with the underlying technology, or very little to do with the underlying technology. If it had to do with the tech, there's just absolutely no reason for Litecoin to have any value at all. Because I mean, it's like literally you just take something, you fork it from Bitcoin, you quadruple the supply, and you change the consensus algorithm. None of the utility is different, to be honest with you, and most of the code is the same. Yet it's its own thing and has its own value, its own community. The value, in my view, of any cryptocurrency comes from the users and what they do with it, the products and services that are purchasable with it, as well as the velocity of the movement of value within that system. So when analyzing whether a cryptocurrency is going to be worth anything or not, the first thing you do is you say, who's the community and how is that community going to grow? And are they stable? Are they sticking around? Or are they kind of like a video game where you have 10 million people month 1, month 2, 8 million, month 3, 2 million, month 4, 500,000, right? Are they sticky? What's your churn rate in that community? And virality is how fast can people recruit each other. So the first question is, will these notions, these protocols, these ideas, these mental infections, these memes, will they propagate to have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of users? And under what conditions would such a propagation occur, and what natural utilities would these things occur? I believe that in the developed world, probably not. The reality is that these things are tremendously difficult to use. They're not terribly consumer friendly, and also they're too volatile to do traditional commerce in. But in the developing world, it's a completely different story. You don't have stable currencies. You don't have stable markets. You don't have stable identity. You don't have stable credit. You don't have insurance. You don't have any of these things, but you have a cell phone. And the very fact that I can put on that device something that now puts you at the same level or better than somebody in America or Germany or England, that's an enormously powerful idea. So if we're looking to how do we get to 3 billion or 4 billion users, and then at that point really would be a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem, we have to ask ourselves, what are the fundamental elements that are required to get these things to work well on cell phones? Well, the good news is that cell phones have become so advanced, and their life cycle is such that even the best of the models end up in Africa and Asia in just a few years, that I think the infrastructure will organically propagate its way into those markets without any input or help from us. The bad news is that none of these protocols are typically user-friendly or appealing on mobile devices, and it requires a lot more crypto and a lot more brilliant ideas that have to be invented, which one of the reasons actually why we founded IOHK. A lot of the large research we do and some of the projects we work on are actually exclusively focused about what is required for getting these things to work in the developing world. Like, how do you do regulated computation with principles and so forth? And these are things that consume a lot of our mind share and time. Now, I will warn you, though, we probably are in a bubble. And I'll tell you why I think that's the case, because you have this rising tides effect. And I remember the last time I saw this, I saw it back in 2013, where Bitcoin went way up and then all the altcoins followed it. And I looked at it and I started asking myself, like, what is the principal reason why we've gone from 1 to 10? You know, where did we get this 10x from? And why is everything else just massively going up? Why is this coin or that coin, which has no community and a very limited development team, and it's only been around for a year, going up? And why are we able to do an ICO and then all of a sudden it gets a 20x right off the bat and people are able to actually realize some of that value? I think that our space has a tendency to get way ahead of itself and grow really, really quickly. And then that's followed by a die-off. And then you reach a plateau, you reach an asymptote. And then it goes back up and it weeds out a lot of the bad, and it makes the system tremendously more resilient. And if you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you can look at these trends and they keep going up and up. So I think you're right in the long term that at some point somebody's going to solve the way to get this to billions of users and get this to work well on cell phones. And this is going to become the financial stack of the developing world, and it will work quite well with legacy systems because of the work of people like Ripple and others. And then at that point probably will be a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem. But I do think it's also going to be one hell of a roller coaster, and you're going to have a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And if you're going to get involved in any altcoin, especially one that's gone way up very quickly, the number one question you should ask is, what the hell is the community going to do? What is going to keep these guys together? I have tremendous respect for Dash. Don't even care about the technology. We did a 50-page report on their treasury system, and it has its fair share of problems, and even the core developers admit that, but at least they're trying to fix them, and they've made some good progress. But the tech doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that the Dash ecosystem has somehow found a way to build a very stable community that is very strong, and it's very evangelistic. The same can be said for Ethereum. The same actually can be said for Steem. I still don't understand the economics of Steem. Bob writes an article, he gets all this money for writing the article, he doesn't really believe in the money. He says, what's the first thing he does? He sells it off, but for some reason it's working. And it only works because the community lets it work. So you always have to ask yourself, if you're really looking for value, Who is the community? How does the community grow? What are the barriers to entry? What are the barriers to exit? What's the virality of this community? And has the community historically been growing, or is it staying stagnant? The other thing is idea flow. There's a great book called Social Physics. It's from Alex Pentland. And Alex is a professor at MIT Media Lab, and he studies sociology in a very rigorous graph theoretic way. One of the things he looks into is if you put people into a network, a graph, and you send ideas through that graph, what configurations are optimal? Optimal mean that you have better outcomes. Let's say if you're talking about investors, are the isolated ones or the connected ones better? Or which investment ideas get propagated, and are these good ideas or not? But the long and the short of social physics is all just about idea flow, this idea of how ideas are going to move and change and be manipulated and so forth. Productive communities are not echo chambers. So how do you know you're in an echo chamber? You walk in with a great idea, and because it wasn't invented there, or you're not part of a clique, when you announce the idea, you're immediately shot down and burnt down to the ground. Like, for example, if you were to go into cryptocurrency XYZ Slack and say, hey guys, I have this new treasury system that's a lot better than the one you guys currently have. We fixed a lot of voting problems. It's much more efficient. It's much more transparent. It's lower cost to implement. And here's this white paper on all this code. If your response is, that's really cool, we'd love to see it, you get all these PMs for the core developers and they say, we want to be part of that, or at least, very least, we're going to give you the time of day to talk to you if it looks credible. That is a community that's receptive to good idea flow. If you go in and everybody says, you're a horrible troll, why are you trying to destroy everything we've done? Our ideas are perfect. What the hell are you doing? That is a community that is not receptive to idea flow and has a much higher probability of becoming brittle, because they'll optimize around a particular scheme, and the minute a flaw has been discovered in that, it shatters and falls all apart. If you compare Bitcoin to Ethereum, for example, and you ask yourself, which one is more receptive? Right now, Ethereum is more receptive to new ideas. To a certain extent, they're open to entertaining the ideas of changing the consensus algorithm, monetary policy, the underlying cryptographic primitives in the system, even basic things with Bitcoin. When after years of study, people have reached a unanimous conclusion on the academic side that we should probably change them, like block size parameters, or maybe some of the ways that the network stack works, or maybe the consensus algorithm has become overly centralized and is becoming fragile as a point. It's like when you criticize people and when you present these ideas, you're brutally criticized. It becomes a holy war. So much so that some of the early adopters, like Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen and others, have just left. They've just been pushed out and they're just doing other things. So that is a community that is not receptive to idea flow as much as Ethereum. And so I think that actually makes Bitcoin significantly less competitive in a certain respect. And I would hope that they can find a way to break their way out. So anyway, in summary, value comes from community. You have to look at the underlying structure of the community, how they talk to each other, how they recruit, when people leave, what causes them to leave, how they negotiate and bring people together. You also have to look at how receptive the community is to idea flow. And if they are very receptive, then there's a very high probability that that is a tremendously competitive, resilient cryptocurrency. Because even if their tech isn't right or the configuration isn't right, they're open-minded enough to realize it and then very quickly evolve and adapt. Because remember, all your competitors give away their secrets for free. There is no notion of trade secrets here. It's all open, so you can very easily evolve.
Well, I don't think that there's a single thing that I disagree with there. And I think some of what you had to say segues into talking about threats to the blockchain. It sounds like you agree with this statement. I'm pretty concerned that we might approach that moment of critical mass almost too soon, before the tech is actually ready, before the scalability is ready, and miss the chance to take that mass adoption leap because the industry simply isn't there yet, especially for a friendly mainstream user experience. Now, some of the other threats, I think, especially external, when we talk about them, governments, regulatory authorities, legislation, national currency blockchains. Now, on that note, I know in the past, IOHK was doing some exploratory work with RSCoin, crypto with central bank regulation compatibility or something along those lines. So I guess my question here is, what the hell, man?
With RSCoin or what?
Yes. What's happening here, Charles?
So that's a lot to deconstruct, but I'll take the RS coin part of it because that's pretty easy. So we brought in a development firm from Russia called Serakel, and we were acquiring a lot of their developers, and we wanted to know if their developers were worth their salt or not. And so we wanted to find some project that we could put the developers on that would give us a good indication of their skill set. So what I like to do is just pick some white paper that looks pretty interesting and give it to them, say, go implement this. And then we have something to talk around. So we were going to a conference in Corfu, Greece, the Bitcoin Summer School that Agalos and others were putting on. And we knew that the authors of RS Coin were attending, Sarah Meiklejohn and George Danezis. So we said, shit, we're going to have a chance in about a month and a half to talk to the authors of the paper. It's a kind of an interesting paper, and it's a different way of doing things, and it's got some good ideas in it, and it's a really good test to see if Serakel actually can do the job or not. So we said, go do it, and we'll get you a speaking slot in Corfu, and it's basically a trial by fire. And the two people who will be sitting in the audience questioning you are the people who invented the protocol. So that's a pretty good test. So we assigned that to them, and we ended up building up RS Coin, and it became a pretty cool little experiment. We did use it for an internal project, but we actually haven't taken the code or sold it or contracted with anybody. So, it's just it was a pedagogical exercise more than anything else. And if you look at our GitHub repo, you'll notice we haven't updated it in quite some time. Now, that said, regulated computation is a completely different matter. And what is the relationship between the sovereign and the individual? I happen to believe that you have kind of two topics that get conflated because people aren't thinking it through too much. One is the supremacy of the individual, and two is the supremacy of the market. So what do I mean by that? So of the individual, I believe that you own your value. If you go out and bust your balls doing concrete work or working at King Soopers or Walmart, you get your paycheck, that is yours. You earned it. I can't come and take it from you just because of what's going on. You have to consent to that. It's a very libertarian view of things. Now, if you're a socialist, they say, well, circumstances trump the person. So
if you're a socialist, just stop listening and please exit my channel immediately. You have
Sure.
no business here.
Sure. But we've seen the result of that. You have these kleptocracies like Venezuela, where it's always a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. We'll nationalize this guy, and then you wake up and your currency's done and the country's in flames and you have food lines and people are killing each other. So that's a failed experiment. Don't do it. But you need to have principles. And what are those principles in Bitcoin terms? Privacy. People ought not to know that you own it or that what you're doing with it. That's your thing. And that I think should be really secure. Second, immutability. People shouldn't be able to go for political inconvenience and change history, because we're going to do that a lot. Like, look at Syria, like land registry there. It's probably been pretty changed as a result of the various different factions that have taken over. So after peace comes to Syria, who the hell's going to come in and decide who owns what where? All the titles are all screwed up. So changing history is a real bad deal. And no matter if it's good in the short term, it's always bad in the long term. So immutability is extremely important. 3, the free flow of value. No one should have the right to say that we're going to draw this arbitrary line around a piece of land and say that your money only can stay within this box. I hate capital controls. I think that they're immoral and they're so destructive to society. So I really firmly believe that you need to have a money system that allows you to send money to somebody else, and that's your decision. So these are some basic principles that I think should never be infringed or violated in our space. So that's the supremacy of the individual. But where it gets conflated is the supremacy of the market. What does that mean? Well, the marketplace is not you. It's a collection of people who have decided to reach consensus on rules to make the trade fair. Some of those rules are created by the market participants, and some of those rules are created by the oversight bodies governing the markets. Okay, so for example, if you're Walmart, you get to say how much you charge for your corn. But then there's some regulator that comes in and says some basic things about how you ought to do your business. For example, when you give somebody on the cash register, say it's $100, you can't charge their credit card $200 unbeknownst to them, or sign them up for an insurance product or something like that. That's just fraud. You can't do these things. So I happen to believe that if an individual is going to enter a market, A, the individual needs to be told what the rules are. But B, this is the side that gets conflated and missed, that once the individual agrees to those rules, they have to be held accountable to them, even if they become inconvenient. Facebook is a great example of this. They say, sign up, this is our product. We're going to give you all this utility. And there's an enormous amount of utility in the platform. But under the hood, you have now consented to giving Facebook certain rights. Okay, so people can't complain that when they created a Facebook page, Facebook now can look at their pictures and understand who they are and micro-target them for advertisement and sell that data to third parties because they got the value. They walked into a marketplace, they took something, and now they're complaining that the person that they took something from wants something back, and they signed a contract to allow that. So where do blockchains come into this? Well, for the first time ever, we have a way of making it a lot more fair. We can encode regulation into smart contracts. We can create regulatory layers, and we can create special domains that when you take your token and send your token into that domain and you consent to having it in there, you can get all this value, let's say a decentralized exchange or a computation layer for gambling. But you must consent to whatever the rules are in that marketplace. So for example, if it's a gambling domain, maybe there's a KYC AML component and that information has to be sent to somebody. Maybe there's an automated tax compliance component and that money is going to be sent to somebody. But this wasn't forced on you. Nobody could reach into your account and take your money out and just grab it from you and say it's ours. That's the supremacy of the individual, and that always has to be preserved. But the minute that you agree to be in that position, then you have to accept that now you have set aside some of your rights and voluntarily surrendered them, and you're giving them up for the greater good of the market. It's just like the military. When you join the military, you sign a lot of contracts. And guess what? You're signing some of your freedom away. You're signing some of your constitutional rights away. The military can now pump drugs into you. They can now tell you to go into harm's way and get yourself killed. They can now take you on long marches. They can now change your job at a moment's notice. They can do a lot of things to you, but you consented to that. You signed an agreement when you joined the military. And similarly, markets work the exact same way. So I think we can reconcile both of these concepts, and I think you do it in layering. I think you do it with strong cryptography, and I think you do it with a transparent smart contract-based approach. And here's what happens. People think, oh my God, I've just made the government so much more powerful. Actually, it's quite the opposite. What you've done by decentralizing this is you've now made governments compete against each other, because you now have this idea of a global jurisdiction, and there's all these instantiations in different domains. So if you don't like what Singapore is doing, you go to Switzerland. If you don't like what Switzerland is doing, go to America or go to Canada, whatever it may be. Who has the best deal for you? Well, wait a minute here. The old model was enormously expensive because your value and your principles and the rules were all intermingled together. There was no supremacy of the individual, it's just the market. And so as a consequence, if you wanted to move your assets from jurisdiction A to B, there was exit taxes, in some cases capital controls, in some cases just not even legal to do. But with a cryptocurrency, now you can vote with your feet. If you don't like A, you can go to B, you can go to C, and so forth. And there's not much governments can do. So what does this mean? It means that they have to take a step back and either fight it, which they'll try, but they won't win. It's just like the RIAA fighting BitTorrent. It's a vastly inferior model can't win against a vastly superior model that people are behind. So what they're going to have to do is change the business model and say, okay, let's create some global standards. And those standards will end up being significantly more fair and more transparent. Some people will still disagree, and we will have gray and dark markets. That's why God made Tor, and that's why we have zero cash and these types of things. They will always exist as the final option when you feel that none of these domains are proper and that none of these markets are fair or properly assembled. But the odds are there are probably many that are, because of just competitive nature and a race to the bottom in terms of openness, and also the fact that you're in control of your money and your identity and your reputation, and it can't be taken from you as long as you've separated these two concepts. So that's kind of my overarching philosophy, and that's reflected in a lot of our research work that we do at IOHK.
Terrific. There's obviously a ton of great stuff in there. Let's dig in a little more about ETC specifically. You already alluded to this a little bit earlier. I completely echo the sentiment that the Casper Ethereum proof of stake switch is going to be a tremendous opportunity for Classic to inherit just a massive amount of that hash power. And quite frankly, I think very recently that hash power even surpassed the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm not positive that's right, but I think that's the case.
Yeah, but that's apples to oranges because they have different consensus algorithms.
Okay.
Kind of different.
All right. Fair, 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 fair. But you're planning some smart pool movement to kind of make more efficient use of that hash power?
Well, okay, so one of the foremost problems with mining is it's a very fragile system. What do I mean by that? It means that it tends to optimize around specialized actors. And even Satoshi knew this was going to happen. So he said, listen, you're going to have CPUs turn into GPUs, turn into FPGAs, turn into ASICs. This is going to happen pretty quickly if there's money at stake, because people like money. And then all of a sudden, it's a race to the lowest cost of power. Who gets that? Subsidized power in developing countries like China. So people who have first access to the tech, first access to the algorithms, first access to the subsidized power are going to win the game. And it becomes eventually a small federated market. In fact, it was great at scaling Bitcoin in Hong Kong. There's this picture of all these miners together. And if you add up all their cumulative hash power, it's more than 51% of the network. You don't have a decentralized protocol when the guys who control the state transitions of your protocol can all be put in a single room. And it's supposed to be a global product. So while mining gives you some magical things that are really magical, that proof of stake actually can't give you. For example, you have algorithmic weight with mining. So you basically, if you're a new guy comes into the blockchain, never seen it before, you don't trust anyone. You don't have any knowledge. You just run a calculation. Bob gives you chain A, Alice gives you chain B, Jane gives you chain C down the line, and you run a calculation of whatever chain you've gotten that has more work behind it, that's your chain. No checkpoints. I don't know of any other system that has that kind of property as elegant and concise as Bitcoin does. Very powerful, okay? But what we are paying right now is enormous cost of energy, and what we're paying right now is the ever-increasing amount of centralization around competency, subsidy, and first access to things. So what things like Smart Pool are trying to accomplish is saying you can have your cake and eat it too. What if you could create a decentralized mining pool? So say, does it really matter if we only have 10 or 20 actors, if the only way they can mine is through some channel that's peer-to-peer and decentralized? So we don't have these private pools or even federated pools that have operators. Instead, you have a decentralized pool. People mine with that decentralized pool, and the output is exactly the same. You get all the security of Bitcoin has, but now you can't have any one of the actors manipulate the behavior of the pool. So as a consequence, you've effectively defederated the federation in a certain sense. You're forcing them to play by certain rules. So this is an idea that Loi Lu out of Singapore and several other people came up with, and they wrote a lovely paper about it, and they've been implementing it in Solidity as a smart contract to show how one would do that. But I would advocate for a lot of research along these lines to find a way to actually put this into a proof of work protocol as a permanent feature that everybody's forced to use. Then you no longer have centralization. You have a way of maximizing decentralization of the system. A lot of things still have to be figured out, like dust transactions and a lot of these other little things. But the smart pool approach actually solved a lot of them. And I think that Loi has done a very good job, and I'm very proud of the hard work that they've done. I believe he's porting it to ETC, and we're certainly going to take a look at that. Now, the other side of it is the energy usage. The problem with cryptocurrencies that use proof of work is the energy usage never gets better. Because if the value goes up, the competition goes up, the amount of resources expended increase, and inevitably the energy usage increases. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on electricity for Bitcoin. It's a fact. More than the nation of Ireland. There's a paper from McDowell that actually shows that Bitcoin consumes more electricity than Ireland consumes. So we're starting to get into like a serious consideration of that. You have this small network, all things considered, compared to Visa or global financial system, but yet it's already become a very energy intensive network. Now, the Bitcoin maximalists will say this is a feature, and it's one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so secure, and there's some truth there. But on the other hand, if you like the environment, it's probably not a good idea to endorse wasting enormous amounts of electricity. So there are two philosophies on how to solve this. One is to change your algorithm to something that doesn't require enormous sums of energy. So that's the proof of stake approach, amongst others. The other philosophy is to say, if we have to waste the energy, let's try to get something out of it other than just work. So that's called useful proof of work. And there's been a lot of ideas floating around about how one would do this. But the basic idea is you take some sort of problem and you find a way to take that problem and create a trap door with the problem that verifies that you've solved the problem. You've done the computations correctly. So you go from an O of n algorithm to a constant or logarithmic time algorithm. And there are some platforms that potentially could do this. One's called Pinocchio. It's from Microsoft Research, and they basically allow you to have an input and output program and a proof. You don't have to look at the program. You just look at the input, the output, and the proof. And it actually tells you if you actually ran the program correctly. And the proof is constant size. It's only 288 bits and evaluates O of 1. So it's a very promising platform. Unfortunately, it's still very inefficient. It has a lot of little bugs and issues that Microsoft and other people are working on to fix. There's also another great paper out of Berkeley, which talks about useful proof of work. So instead of doing proof of work problems on wasted electricity with hashing, finding reverse of a hash, there's like all these useful problems that if you solve them would be useful for real problems in computer science. And the paper actually enumerates them and shows how to construct a proof of work system based on it. Another way is actually saying, well, why don't we shift from proof of work to proof of storage? And then basically use a proof of work system to secure a decentralized database. So there's a great paper that was written by Ari Jules and a few others called Permacoin back in 2013. And Permacoin basically is an attempt to build a proof of work system on a database securing the database. So this is a line of research, and there's been a lot of future research that's being done, and I think there's a lot of promise there. So I think in the future, we have a lot of options. First, you can decentralize the mining process itself, either by disincentivizing the formation of pools, either by making it impossible to create a pool, or by using things like Smart Pool. And then on the energy consumption side, either you don't care or you care. If you care, you have to use a different protocol. If you do care, then maybe it's, if you don't care, but maybe it's a good idea to switch your proof of work to something that's at least more useful. So you're optimizing the resources that you spend in that respect. So that's kind of how I see the debate forming. And there's a lot of really good research that's starting to become prevalent. We're starting to see some good coins floating out that are derivatives of that research.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that China's been a very big driver for the ETC community, I believe. And on that same note, they're obviously the preeminent space in mining. So with you set to inherit so much of this mining hash power, was this planned, or just happen to be kind of a perfect storm for ETC?
We don't know. Maybe Ethereum will abandon their plan to go to proof of stake and just stay on proof of work, or maybe the Chinese miners will all get shut down, or maybe they'll all go and mine some other cryptocurrency. Miners tend to mine the things that are most profitable, not necessarily the things that are most philosophically agreeable to them. In the Satoshi days, we all had laptops and we could leave them on at night, and those were great. So you could be a philosopher. In the mining days, mining operations are businesses. And at the end of the day, it's cash in, cash out. So your mining operation has to be profitable. And so you can't exactly say, I'm going to mine cryptocurrency A because I love and agree with cryptocurrency A, unless cryptocurrency A produces enough money for you to keep lights on. So if B is more profitable, the rational decision for a miner is to pivot. It's not because they're assholes or bad people. It's just because of economics and the fact that you have a fiduciary obligation to your business to do what's best for your business. So that's always been one of the challenges with miners, is it's like this group of people that you're bribing to come into your ecosystem and do stuff for you, but they're mercenaries and by design. And so if somebody's paying more, the barbarians can turn on Rome and burn the city down. So you have to be really careful when you create incentive schemes that are very sensitive to your competitors, especially if your competitors can do bad things to you, which is why people are considering consensus algorithms that aren't even based on mining, but based on things like trusted hardware. Like there's ideas of like T-Chain and using things like Intel SGX and ARM Trust Zone and TPMs to build kind of a namespace and give people control. Where now all of a sudden you've democratized the system now, and there's no cost to participation. So really you have a situation where people are going to participate because they believe in it, like folding at home or these other things, not because they built a business around it. And this is one of the core arguments for proof of stake as well, in that my financial interests are directly aligned with the survivability and value of the underlying network. I can't just point my miners to another chain and go play in that space if this chain starts failing. If I'm a proof of stake coin and my coins start going down in value, that's not good for me. And so I'm going to behave in a way that I'm always trying to maximize the overall value of the chain. So there's a lot of good economic questions to ask there. But to answer your question in particular about are we going to inherit the Chinese? We'll get some of them. We already have some. Chandler Guo, for example, he's done a wonderful job, and there's some great people there. And We love getting more miners. It's an amazing thing. But the end all be all isn't mining. It's more about the totality of the community and what each actor in the community's incentives happen to be to grow the ecosystem and make the ecosystem more vibrant and robust.
Excellent. I mean, let's dive right in and let's talk a little bit more about that. Plans to obviously further penetrate the Chinese market, hosting ETC ICOs of your own, or in fact, you talked a lot about wanting to differentiate the Ethereum Classic chain more. So what are some more of those plans of differentiation? I know at one point that you were considering a proof of work, proof of stake hybrid for Ethereum Classic. So just kind of talk about the technical development roadmap, what you guys are considering, differentiators, and where all the big things we can expect from Ethereum Classic.
Yeah, so it's first important to understand that Ethereum Classic is a true federation. So I'm not in charge, and I don't want to be in charge, and that's good. It's very good for our ecosystem. So there are my opinions, and then there's the community. And no matter what I believe, it has to be enshrined in an ECIP, an Ethereum Classic Improvement Proposal. And we have to go fight and convince people that it's a good idea. And there's a hell of a lot of people on the other side that probably won't think it's a good idea. And that's good for the community because it means that eventually you get down to that crucible of goodness. So there's also ETC Dev. Now, where do we have consensus? We have consensus on proof of work probably being the path forward. What instantiation of proof of work, whether it should be useful or a hybrid, or we should change Ghost to something else and add Spectre. There's a lot of open questions there, and these things are going to be fought over the next 24 months. In my view, I think it's a really good idea to institute a hybrid consensus algorithm. In particular, we created one called Twins Coins with Hong Chang out of Virginia Commonwealth University. So what is it? Well, it's basically a consensus algorithm that creates a checks and balances system where a miner will find a block, which in turn elects a delegate from the stakeholder set, and that stakeholder finishes the block, and only then and then when these two have come together do you advance the network. And let's say the stakeholder doesn't do their job, people are still mining, another block will be found, another stakeholder is elected. So you have this lovely competitiveness, and we created a mathematical model that showed that not only does it work, and we should have liveness according to GKL 15, that you get much higher resistance against selfish mining and miners who collude and so forth, because you have this checks and balances that's built in, but you have none of the problems of proof of stake. You don't have long range attacks, you don't have grinding attacks, you don't have nothing at stake attacks and so forth. So all that stuff is out the window. So it's a really nice compromise where you're mostly still mining, but then you also have this added layer of security, which I think is a really productive way of getting people engaged. For free, you also get a voting system, because now you have all these POS mechanics. You can then overlay systems to start making decisions about, let's say, maybe a treasury, maybe a forking protocol to change the protocol to a new configuration and so forth, kind of like a Tezos style play. So I think that's a line of research that's really good. And we're going to eventually write an ECIP once our client, Growth and Deek, is done for how one would transition to a hybrid consensus algorithm. Then there are some open questions about the blockchain architecture. For example, what authenticated data structures should be in this thing. We have Merkle-Patricia tries and Ethereum, Bitcoin is Merkle trees, but there are actually others. We created an authenticated dictionary paper that's quite good with Leo Raisin out of Boston University. But there's all these kinds of authenticated data structures that you can put into your block header that give you some more features, richness, and functionality, and perhaps better light client support. And there's some really good ideas that are starting to brew up there. So there needs to be some questions about that. And there needs to be some questions about whether should we continue being this very crude directed acyclic graph by a Ghost, or should we abandon Ghost altogether or go with a better version of it, because there's been now 4 years of good research post-Ghost for that scheme. So there's going to be some discussions around blockchain architecture, authenticated data structures, and so forth. And eventually we'll come up, I think, with a reasonable community conclusion of either to stay the course or to pivot a little bit or pivot a lot. And I think a lot of that has to do with whatever our scalability proposal happens to be. Then the other thing is, how much decentralization do we want to have on the mining process? And do we want to change the underlying mining algorithm to either be ASIC resistant or to be more decentralized, like put smart poll into the protocol itself and so forth? But I think that's probably more of a 2019 fight or late 2018 fight. There's just a lot of things in front of that to figure out. Now, in terms of other technology, there still is an open question of how will we pay for things. So you mentioned ICOs, and this is one of my problems actually with the Ethereum model right now. You got a lot of people really rich really quickly, and they think they can't lose. You know, you have to understand something. When you get 100x or 1000x in a very short period of time, you're not smart, you're lucky. And the biggest moral hazard in the world is when you don't know the difference between being smart and being lucky. Okay, maybe, just maybe, you're a brilliant chemist, you came up with some new drug, and you know this drug is going to work, and you get FDA approval. Congratulations. That's 1 in a million. But when you get a million people buy something and they all get 100x or 1000x, they just got lucky on it. So because people have gotten lucky, they have a lot of loose money. And so you have all these ICOs that are forming on Ethereum now, which in my view have dubious strategies. They don't really fully appreciate the complexity of what they're trying to do, or in some cases are totally unnecessary to have their own token. Just use Ether, that are launching and raising 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. And the offerings are just weird, like in 30 seconds to get $35 million, and people are spending $2,000 on a transaction fee just to front run everybody else so that they can get in. Or you have something like a 94% pre-mine, a $300 million market cap, and you know that's somehow a fair offering. It's just nuts. So I think that in many respects, the ICO model does prey upon irrational exuberance, and it tends to lead to bad outcomes in the long term. But it is a very powerful model because it democratizes the raising of capital, and it democratizes the funding of good ideas, and gives people in bad jurisdictions access to money they would have never been able to get. If you live in Africa, and let's say South Africa, you go to a great university there, and you're a brilliant person, you have an amazing idea, you're not going to be able to go and get money out of Silicon Valley or out of Europe. Just won't. That's just the way the world works. Especially true if you're in a real bad jurisdiction like Venezuela, where everything's falling apart. So what does that person do when that person wants to raise money? They don't. Now they have a new model where they actually conceivably do that. So I think that there's both a good side and a bad side. I don't completely subscribe to this Chris DeRose, everything is, or Tone Vays view where like everything is a scam, these all guys are crooks. I think a lot of them really do want to do something great. It's just they don't fully appreciate what responsibilities they're taking on, the fact that they now have a social contract and a relationship with people, and also that that getting too much money too quickly can just be as hazardous as not having enough money to execute. Now, what does this have to do with Ethereum Classic? Now that Ethereum Classic is worth quite a bit of money, people are probably going to start running ICOs on Ethereum Classic. Because guess what? Our people got a 10x, 15x. Now there's a lot of loose money floating around Ethereum Classic. Somebody's going to get it in their head that it's a good idea to launch an app coin, and they probably will get well funded as a consequence of that. Doesn't mean it'll succeed or fail. It's a scam or not a scam. It's just the reality of nature. How I would like to see Ethereum Classic funded is via a treasury. I think the time has come for that. There's some great evidence that treasuries are good, from Pivx to Dash to Zen to others who are actively trying to find a way to have the blockchain pay the bills. We're one of the few companies in space that's actually rigorously pursuing it. We have a team at Lancaster University doing coercion-resistant liquid democracy and adding it to a treasury model that we constructed with our Veritas team in Ukraine. And then after that, we're going to have that game theorist come in and clean all up the model. And after that, we think we'll have a really good reference treasury model. And we're going to fight like hell to try to convince people in ETC that this is a potentially really good idea. And also, it makes the system more vibrant and robust, because now, unlike Ethereum, where the only way you can get money to build your dApp is to create a token which you may or may not need and go do an ICO or take VC money, but if it's an open source project and you're running it with no toll road to give yourself a cut, well then what's the VC's angle? There's no rational way to fund that. Now you can actually send a ballot to a treasury, and the treasury can fund you, and you can get your $500,000, your $1 million to go build that infrastructure. So that's a competitive advantage in my view, and I think it's something that would make us very different from ETH in the way the community works. The other thing is that you have the synergistic effect of people talking to each other, which is so powerful. Going way back to the beginning of the interview where I was talking about idea flow, one of the reasons why Dash has grown so much, whether you love them or you hate them, is they have these ballots and people can talk about what to fund and what not to fund. And they're always going about what is our mission, what are our goals, why are we doing what we're doing, who's worth money, who's not worth money to fund. So similarly, if you had an open process for that, you can really start having some serious discussions about what core infrastructure ought to be deployed on your platform. For example, what if Loy Lu comes and says, I want to deploy Smart Pool on Ethereum Classic. And at the same time, some guy, let's call him Bob, comes and says, I want to build a relay system so Ethereum Classic can now talk to Ethereum, and you can call Ethereum contracts on Ethereum Classic. These are great projects. And then let's say you can only fund one. How would you reach that? Well, if you had a treasury system, there'd be a formal process. They'd both propose ballots, and now they're fighting each other. And there's an intellectual discussion about priorities. There's a discussion about what's going to create the most value for the community. There's a discussion about who do we think is going to be best to execute. And each side has an incentive to make the case for themselves. With ICOs, the incentive is, do I think this is going to make me a good return? Not necessarily are they actually going to deliver the product. Not necessarily are they the best team to deliver the product. It's more a macroeconomic circumstance of, well, everything's going way up and I've already made 100x, so I'll put some money into this and hope I get another 10 or 20x. That's a very different mindset, and it has nothing to do with about what is best for the ecosystem, what is best for the project. You're not differentiating anything. It's all just about ROI in many of these ICOs that are occurring. So I think it's a dangerous model from that angle. That said, it's a great model for people in countries that don't have access to capital, and it's an alternative way of doing things. I will add one other caveat to ICOs. One thing that does disturb me is that in ICOs, people aren't doing KYC and AML. And I know the more libertarian people say, like, you don't have the right. But, you know, the reality is that when you offer something, you are taking another human being's money. Okay? You have to know who those people are. Whether they be investors, donors, customers, you have to know who they are, because when bad things happen, you have to know who to talk to. And you have to know who to say, I'm sorry to. You have to know who to put in consumer protection for. I'm very old-fashioned in that respect, but I believe when you have a business, and you have to have relationships with your customers, and you have to inform them, you have to treat them fairly, and you have to work hard to be in their best benefit. You're not always going to be perfect. You're not always going to be completely accurate. You're not always going to execute as well as you should. But one of the things that does bother me is that all these ICOs are raising huge sums of money, and they're not doing KYC AML. There's a philosophical problem, as I just mentioned, but there's also a practical problem. So if somebody does an ICO and the inventory all sells out in 15 minutes, how do you know that the founders of the project didn't put in 50% of the float? If you've been in the space long enough, remember Next, when they had that little crowd sale, and it was very small, very selective, and they closed it very early. Probably not a lot of, the Gini coefficient was probably pretty bad there, okay? So what does this mean? It means that any value appreciation you have may be utilized by the very early people, the founders, to make a windfall profit and have nothing at all to do with whether they've actually executed the project or not. And it's not transparent. You don't even know. Because I can just, if I'm an investor in an ICO, just chop my offering into 25 transactions or 500 transactions and make it look like it's 500 people. If you do KYC and AML, that's not possible, because you got the guy's passport, you got his proof of address, you got his number. So you know it's one person or 500 people and so forth. So at least you have an added layer of protection there. And I think that's actually better for the investor in a certain respect, because you know it's an organic participation. You know what the average transaction size is. You know who owns what. And there's much lower possibility of a pump and dump in that particular respect. So that's a personal pet peeve of mine. I think there's also going to be some regulatory problems for people with ICOs, namely because let's say it's not a security. Well, what if you're a money service business? Yeah, you now have to do that KYC AML. And if you didn't do that, that's not just a fine, it's jail time. There was a Bitcoin trader actually in the United States who was selling stuff on local Bitcoins, and he was running an unregistered money service business. I think he got 9 years in jail. So who's to say that a token issuer is not an MSB? I mean, if you really think about it, it's like, oh, we're decentralized and everything. Well, hang on a second here. Is there a team? Is there a legal entity? Or does the team have access to the funds, or the legal entity have access to the funds? It seems pretty centralized if all the money is coming into one pie, right?
I totally agree. Unfortunately, I think the ultimate byproduct of that is going to be seeing a lot of innovation flee the United States. And unfortunately, you know, I think anybody who watches my channel knows that I trash talk a lot of foreigners and love the US. We're number one.
We are number one. I love the United States. It's, you know, I've been to 31 countries in the last 2 years, and everybody always asks me, like, what is your favorite country? What's like the best country? And I always say United States. You know, we have the best people. Why? Because they come here. It's not necessarily that they're born here, but we're a country that's built on the backs of immigrants. And everybody has a story, and everybody has a culture, and they came here and they all mixed together, and we got the best. 50% of the Fortune 500 companies in America, tech companies, have been founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants. So that's a very powerful thing. And that's what makes America so incredibly great and why we're so damn innovative, because we can't make it at home. We'll get it from somewhere else, but they come here because it's the best environment. Now, with respect to what you're saying about innovation leaving the United States, to a certain extent, we've already seen it happen. The reason why Crypto Valley is in Switzerland and not in Silicon Valley or anywhere else is not because I went to Zug and made all these backroom deals and something. I mean, we certainly worked like hell with the guys in Zug and set up an SRO and all this other stuff. And now there's 40 companies there. It's because Switzerland created the best regulatory environment for cryptocurrencies. And they had open arms. And they said, if you want tax clarity in 2 weeks, you'll get it. You'll get a ruling. Okay? You can't get that in the United States. And it's incredibly frustrating. So I do think that these regulations do strangle innovation, and they're built in a way that tend to benefit incumbents. That's more true in the financial industry than, frankly, any other industry in the United States. On the other hand, regulations don't exist in a vacuum, and they don't exist for no reason whatsoever, and they're not always incompetent. You know, there are basic principles behind when you take other people's money. You got to tell them what you're going to do with it. You got to do the things that you say you're going to do. You got to honor the contracts that you sign. And if you just take the money and it's all just a game to defraud people and run away, there needs to be recourse there. And that recourse can't just be economic, because what if they spent all the money? You consume, but there's nothing there. So you need to have some criminal recourse in that respect. But where do you draw that line? And also, when and how should the regulators step in, especially when you tilt your head to the right, these things are securities. When you tilt your head to the left, they're not. And they can be used in many different ways. It's really a huge challenge, which is probably why none of the regulatory bodies have taken a very firm stance on anything yet. They're just kind of letting the market organically grow and keeping a tally of the moral hazards. But I will remind every single person in the cryptocurrency space that statutes of limitations are long in the securities world. And just because you've done something a few years ago and nothing happened, it has no bearing on reality. I think it's 7 years they can come at you. So they can still do something with Mastercoin if they wanted to. And
yeah, I can 100% confirm it's 7 years on the dot.
Yeah, and so that's something you have to understand if you go and do an ICO in U.S. jurisdiction, that at some point there will be some form of an event. And this will not be a forward-looking event, because what a regulator does is it doesn't say, we're just going to interpret the law moving forward. They say the law has always been this way, and we have just decided to start enforcing it. And now let's look at everybody who's out of compliance. And some will be made an example of. Silk Road is the greatest example in the world of that, where some politicians say, let's make an example out of
Chuck Schumer, let's call him out by name, exactly. The filthy son of a bitch, free Ross Ulbricht.
He's a horrible guy, but he goes and says, I don't care about the historical separation of the intelligence services and the law enforcement that we've had since the damn Church Committee. Don't care about it. NSA, work with the FBI, work with these guys, and find out who the hell is running Silk Road, and then build a parallel investigation to throw the kid in jail. That's what they did. There's a lot of evidence of it, and they structured the case so brilliantly that even when it was blatant, the misconduct of the case, they were still able to win it and put him in jail for life.
Oh, absolutely. International law. They did this through fucking Iceland.
The investigators stole money. In ordinary circumstances, your case is done. Your case is done. You get a lawsuit against you when the people investigating you are criminals themselves. But not only do they get away with it, they threw the kid in jail for life. So it's
staggering that any of this held up in court or like appeals getting denied. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So my point is that if the government wants to crack down on something, the law doesn't matter. It's all that matters is what is the opinion they want to propagate. They will find somebody to crack down on, and they'll crush the son of a bitch. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. Nothing new. Back in the 90s, we had eGold and PayPal and all these other money processors on the web. And a long time, they didn't think they needed to have money service business licenses. Some of them managed to get them. The ones that didn't, they ended up going to jail. And they weren't bad people. They weren't criminals. They were innovators. It's just they were on the wrong side of regulation. So I agree completely with you that not only can regulation stifle innovation, in some cases, it can victimize innocent people. And it's incredibly wrong. One of the reasons why I got involved in Bitcoin is actually because of civil asset forfeiture. I was involved in the Ron Paul movement back in the 07-08 campaign, running around, knocking on doors, saying Ron Paul's the greatest guy ever. But it was the first time I'd ever even heard that phrase, was in that movement. This whole idea that a police officer can just pull you over, you can have some cash in your back seat, because let's say you're a drywaller and your clients pay you in cash, and he can say, oh, that must be drug money, take the money, and then you have to fight in court for months to years to get some of it back. That, where I come from, that's theft. Plain and simple. That's theft. But if the government does it, apparently it's right. So I love the fact that I now have money that they can't do that. And if they're going to try, they got to sue me. And I'd love to have the court decide, because a judge usually is going to rule in my favor in that particular case. And then I have to consent even after the judge rules. That's a great world to be in. So similarly, smart contracts with regulation, I think, are going to have the exact same impact that Bitcoin has had with value and money. And frankly, I think that if we push that hard and keep our integrity and our ethics, and we put our noses to the grindstone, and we build some great business models, and we get all this value into the cloud, and we start getting some jurisdictions to recognize it, now we have more leverage, and we can't get Schumered like Ross did, and we won't be the drywaller having the officer come and take our money. We actually have some more control. And that's another reason why America is the greatest country in the world, by the way, because we were the first guys to realize that the citizens actually can take control, and we don't have to accept whatever the hell the state is telling us to do. We're great despite the fact that our country sometimes is not great, not because our country is great.
I also think it's fascinating that our country was essentially founded on government Bitcoin principles of a decentralized, more states' rights that we seem to have over time gotten rid of and created more larger centralized government. But that's a conversation that you and I can have at another date. I want to dive more into some other blockchain innovations and kind of dovetail off something that you were just talking about, a seizure of property.
Sure.
One of the things that scares me about Bitcoin, about blockchain technology, is kind of that transparent, open, immutable ledger, where if we get to the point where states can kind of link you to the wallet addresses, or they can look at a coin and they can say, hey, at some point along the way, this was used to fund terrorist activities or something along those lines. With a lot of the overstepping of rights that we've seen with the Patriot Act, it's not unrealistic to say at one point a Bitcoin was used to fund terrorist activity. A couple years down the line, you have it, and somehow it gets seized from you. That's a scary thought. One of the best solutions that I have personally seen to this, and I know that you actually spoke to the PIVX developers approximately a month ago, Zero Coin Protocol. What did you talk to the developers about, and what specifically are your thoughts on Zero Coin?
All right, so let's start with the abstract and move to the particular. I always like doing that. The problem with interviewing a mathematician is that's the route we always go. In the abstract, privacy is a really interesting concept in that you don't even know what ought to be private until you know. And I'll give a great example of that. So let's look at Iraq. So during the reign of Saddam Hussein, the only way you could be somebody is being a member of the Ba'ath Party. Okay? And what did that mean? You had to be very public about it. You know, wear the uniform, show up at the rallies, make sure that everybody knows you're a member, so then you can get the good jobs. You can go to the good colleges. Your children can have the good future. Okay? Then all of a sudden, America takes over, and Bremer and the rest of the crew come in, they de-Ba'athify the country. And they say, if you're a member of the Ba'ath Party, you can't serve in the government. It's the same thing happened to a lesser extent in Nazi Germany, where, you know, the only way to be somebody is be a Nazi. And then all of a sudden we denazified the country. And now that hurt your opportunities, especially the higher up in the party you were. So you go from a paradigm where being public about your affiliation, your beliefs, or some characteristic about you is beneficial, so you broadcast it as much as possible. Then the paradigm shifts, and now you're on the other side of history. And it's actually a massive detriment, and you wish you could erase that history. So it's extremely important to understand that privacy is not just a snapshot today in this part of history. Privacy has a long arc, and things that you think are totally fine to be public today may end up destroying you in the future. So what does that mean? It means that by default, things about you, as much as possible, especially your financial history, ought to be anonymous. And the only way they get de-anonymized is with your consent or in circumstances where the market demands it and you've consented to that ahead of time. Okay, that's a very libertarian way of viewing privacy. And there's certainly a large spectrum of people that have feelings one way or the other. And, you know, we've had this debate many times. Now let's talk about cryptocurrencies and privacy in general. Okay, so it's not just good enough to say that I have made my cryptocurrency private by strengthening the linkability, the delinkability guarantees. In other words, connecting that pseudonymous key to Alice or Bob. That's just not good enough. Why? Because you might not know that this particular address belongs to Alice or Bob, but you'll know Alice is a user because she hasn't obfuscated the network stack. You'll know that Bob is a user. And just by being a user could potentially be incriminating. You know, if, for example, let's say you live in a country where homosexuality is illegal, you might not know what Alice is doing in the gay club, but the very fact that you know she went into the gay club might demonize her and substitute your favorite religion. Let's say you're in Egypt and they're going anti-Christian on people. The very fact that Bob goes into the church, maybe he went in to ask for directions, who knows? But the fact he's there, now you're going to get killed or arrested and imprisoned. Okay, so you also have to anonymize the use of the protocol in some way. Then the other thing is, who do people target? So if you're an official and you're looking to crack down on people, make an example, you don't pick grandma who's done $5 worth of damage. You pick some very visible, very sexy target that's flaunting its nose. So what you do is you just order things and you say, who's the worst offender? The biggest tax cheat, the biggest theft, whatever. Okay, so you also have a situation that when you are on a blockchain, you send value from Alice to Bob, we know how much money is being transmitted from Alice to Bob. So if I'm going to selectively isolate particular transactions and look very deeply at those transactions, I'm going to look at the highest value ones. So it's good to also anonymize the amounts being sent. And there are schemes like confidential transactions, for example, which can do this. So linkability, the use of the protocol, and also the amounts being sent. These are kind of your three pillars of anonymity. And all of them are incredibly important. And I think that there's some great protocols being developed which give you some or all of these things. Like Dandelion helps you a little bit on the network side of things. There's been advancements in confidential transactions, which are good. And linkability is really the domain of things like Zcoin and Zcash. Now, what in particular did I talk to the PIVX team about? It was more of a courtesy call. Anytime anybody's involved in privacy and anytime anybody's involved in treasury, I want to meet the team because we're in the treasury business. We're also in the privacy business. And we may have some open source protocol that we've created that I would love to share and have them implement, especially a treasury, because that's a great funding model for me. It's like creating a bunch of miniature national science foundations where I can now propose ballots to fund research and things, and I don't have to have a corporate sponsorship or a government give me money. So I want PIVX to be successful. I want Dash to be successful. I want ETC to get a treasury and be successful. And then for the rest of my life, I can run IOHK just off of working for blockchains. It's the most honest business in the world then. And I feel real good about that. But we did have some conversations about the philosophy of privacy, about their direction and their roadmap and where they want to go. And I think they have some good ideas. But honestly, I think the problem with any of these snark-based schemes, whether they be zero coin or zero cash, is we're not just quite there yet. The underlying cryptographic primitives, the way snarks are constructed, the efficiencies of the schemes, the size of transactions, and so forth, they're all not quite optimal. And that's because the technology is generationed. You know, it's kind of like if you're a car guy, remember when Nissan came out with the CVT, the continuously variable transmission? It's this brilliant idea. It's an amazing idea, great piece of technology. First generation of it, we call it the shop technology because you're always sending your car in for some damn transmission problem. But then generation 2 was a lot better. And then generation 3 is like, okay, now the thing works and we're starting to realize the value. So similarly, we're in the second generations of snarks. The first generations were very primitive. It was a proof of concept and it showed that the idea actually works. The second generation are things like Zcash and Zerocoin, where we know now not only it works, but it can actually build a practical money system on it. The third generation will have all the bells and whistles. The security will be better. It will be dramatically faster. And we'll have a lot of other little ancillary benefits and things like that. So I'm glad to see the emergence of snark coins in general. And I'm glad to see that a lot of researchers are taking it really seriously. And we're starting to see an all-you-can-eat buffet of ideas about how to make these schemes even better. And there's some related schemes that are kind of working their way in. There's like homomorphic encryption. There's verified computation, and so forth. And these are all like kind of in the same club, and all of them are getting better very quickly. So ultimately, I think it's a good thing, and we're certainly going to publish a lot of great papers on snarks at some point. And our hope is that we can get that tech where it needs to go. Now, where does it need to go? Privacy by design. Keep everything anonymous and let the customer decide when to de-anonymize. And this is where that, going back to the middle part of our interview, the supremacy of the individual and the supremacy of the market paradigm really works well, because now what you can do is you can have your private ledger, you have your private token, and then when you enter this marketplace, you expose some information about where you got it, maybe some of the AML and all this other stuff, to certain people in that space. They see it, the general world doesn't see it, and you might even get kind of a great zero knowledge situation where they can't prove to other people that that's actually you, but they know it's you. So they've satisfied their due diligence, they've satisfied the requirements to actually regulate you in a certain respect, but you've been regulated in a way that doesn't actually expose your privacy. And there's some great papers on potential schemes to do this. For example, one is a paper from Cornell on sealed glass proofs, where you provide facts to an enclave in trusted hardware, and you can verify things about those facts, but the facts themselves can't escape the enclave and get destroyed, kind of like a perfect Ford secrecy style scheme. So what does that mean? It means that the person's done his job and made sure that you're not a terrorist or a bad guy, but you've never had to surrender your personal privacy. And we have a much better balance in these particular markets. So privacy by design, use things like sealed glass proofs and try to minimize the exposure of your PII and your history in particulars to other people. And ultimately, I think that results in a much, much better world. And if the paradigm shifts on you, you don't find yourself like a Bath Party member now saying, oh God, what do? I can't even get a job as the dog catcher because I've been ostracized. You have a kind of a do-over, a right to be forgotten in a certain respect.
Okay, so just to kind of put a nice little neat bow on that, you talked about Zcash, some of the zero coin stuff being second generation. This custom build that PressTab, 7hacks, Spock, those guys are doing, would you view that as kind of the 2.5 or the generation 3?
No, I'd still
of the zero coin?
No, it's still second generation. You can count on your hands how many people understand Snark technology. I mean, it's like you got a lot of books.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
You got a lot of books like this, that are really thick and filled with tons of math that you have to read before you can even comfortably understand what the hell a Snark is. I don't even fully get it. And I invest in these types of things. And really, there's only a small group of people that I really believe are competent in that respect. But this is the problem with cryptography in general. It's really easy to use it. It's really easy to fuck it up. And it's incredibly hard to build it, incredibly hard to make it right. That's why they always say don't implement your own crypto library unless you're crazy. And that's why people are professionally skeptical of any new cryptographic idea. Like we know because of Shor's algorithm that we're going to have to get away from RSA and DLP and elliptic curves and these things. We know we're going to have to leave these things behind. They're wonderful things, but they're just not going to last too much longer if quantum computers are going to come and hit us. But then the problem is the next generation stuff, like the lattice crypto stuff and the hash-based crypto stuff and these other things, they're not necessarily as well thought out or necessarily as well studied as they need to be. And the assumptions aren't as necessarily secure as they need to be for us to actually pivot to them. And this is a situation where you have the best minds in the world, like seriously brilliant people who spend all day just sitting in a room looking at a whiteboard, talking to other brilliant minds, still not being able to figure it out. So I don't care if you're a rock star developer. You're not going to invent better snarks. You're just not. You're going to fuck something up. And the problem is you're going to fuck it up in a way that you don't know you fucked it up until somebody else figures it out, and then your whole scheme falls apart and everything gets really, really bad. Especially if people are betting their lives on the privacy of your system. There have been many cases where anonymous messaging systems have been used by dissidents, political dissidents in third world countries, where it turned out that there was an exploit in the system that allowed the secret police of the third world nation to now know who people were, and then take them and put them in prisons, in some cases kill them. Okay, so I think that you cannot be naive when you get involved in this game. And the only way we're ever going to get where we need to go is you have to marry the academic world and the engineering world in a very, very tight bond and move in a very systematic, deliberate, methodical process, and only use code that has been very thoroughly reviewed and ideas that have been peer reviewed. And not peer reviewed saying that we submitted it to some cryptocurrency conference or to some peer reviewed journal that the cryptocurrency people put up. No, the place that RSA was presented at, real conferences, okay, that have people who have spent a lifetime professionally trying to break other people's stuff and have gone through extensive training and have been brutalized by process themselves and make it their business to tell you why you're wrong. That is really the key. And that's the standard that we need to hold for all of our crypto systems, especially the systems that we rely upon for privacy. So that's one of the dangers I think that we have with anybody who's tinkering or playing around with snarks. I admire the gumption. I love the passion. I know they're doing it out of a position of philosophy and love, and I really think that's a great thing. But on the other hand, I will caution everybody that if a process is not properly followed, it will probably result in failure, and that failure could have catastrophic consequences, including up to death.
That is nothing but terrific stuff, and obviously a ton to unpack. Just to keep things moving, let's go on to another big blockchain innovation and talk the biggest one, the Bitcoin scaling drama.
Okay.
Charles, you are obviously
running out of time.
Wait, do you need to switch to a quick Q&A? How much time do you have?
We can do another 30
already.
We can do another 30 minutes. That's fine. But I mean, we've been going for over 2 hours now, and I have another meeting in a bit.
Yes. All right. Sorry.
That's the problem with running a global company. You have calls to Asia, and unfortunately, they take place at night, so you can't really sleep because you have calls in the day and calls at night. But anyway, yeah, let's do another 30. That's the best I can do.
Okay. All right. So we'll do real quick. Let's just do one thorough question. Bitcoin scaling drama. What's your position?
Okay, so scaling is actually not as hard of a problem as you think it is. So there's two types of scaling. There's scaling of data and there's scaling of transactions. Okay, so the vanity metric that everybody looks at is, what is my TPS? So Bitcoin's 7, and PayPal's this, and Visa's this, and so forth. And people love to brag and say, I'm at 10,000 transactions per second, or something like that. Like Elastico is a great example, or Bitcoin NG, or any of these things that can potentially improve your scaling. So it's like usually a sharding scheme where you say, I'm going to process different transactions on different threads, and then we have some way of putting them back together. And that's fine, and it's great. But the big thing is the blockchain itself needs to be partitioned. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now we live in a replicated world where when I put a byte of data into the blockchain, that is replicated by n full nodes. It is not a sustainable system. You are creating the most competitive, sacred database in the world. And if you're going to end up being used for many applications like auditing checkpoints and voting and other things, and these things have to be committed to the blockchain, it will necessarily grow to petabytes in size. Not because you want it to, but because the system has to grow to that point to meet the need. What does that mean? It means that the only person who can have it is a very small group of people who have gigantic hard drives, right? So you need to be able to break it up and say, Bob, you get a chunk, and Alice, you get a chunk, and there's some erasure code we put on top. And when we chop it all up, there's a way of putting it all back together with some availability guarantee. So I think that the sharding debate and the partitioning debate is what's underlying scalability. And we have to have a philosophical discussion in Bitcoin about what we want to be. If we want to be a settlement layer for large amounts of value that are mostly a unit of account, then it's perfectly okay to have a low TPS rate, and it's perfectly okay to have a very expensive database. Because basically you're just this settlements layer for industry, and all your real cool stuff is going to be an overlay protocol, like the Lightning Network, or if sidechains works, then some sidechain where all this magic happens. Okay, but if you want the underlying network to be like really cool and really fast and have a high TPS rate, you have to both be able to shard the transaction space, and you have to be able to partition the blockchain and have strong availability guarantees. Now, what's the state of the art? We can shard the state space. That's easy. A lot of people have figured out how to do it. There's plenty of good papers. The blockchain partitioning, probably going to be not too hard to do, but you won't have the same level of security and availability that you currently have in a replicated model. So it's a game of trade-offs. So that's that with that. Now, in particular, the block size debate, I wrote an article when Mike Hearn left the space. I think it was a year and a half ago, right when scaling Bitcoin was occurring. And my opinion was adopt segregated witness because it's a decent idea, fixes transaction malleability, and it's useful for other things. Okay. And also increase the block size to 2 megabytes. Then go ahead and create an organic growth metric based on 2 factors. One is the rate at which disk space tends to increase over time. And 2 is the rate at which network capacity tends to increase over time. Okay, we go from 56K modems to DSL to cable, and we tend to get more bandwidth over time. And similarly, we go from 100 megabyte hard drive to a gigabyte hard drive to a 100 gigabyte hard drive. Now we're in the terabytes and so forth. There is a way to model that. So why don't you model those things and create a mathematical metric like we have with difficulty retargeting or the monetary policy, that over time, after so many blocks, we organically increase the block size. Then you never have to have the conversation again, because you know that you're always going to be growing on par with technology. And you're always going to get that real 2 megabyte value at that time. And so I think that's a much more elegant way of solving the block size debate in particular. Then you need to pivot the conversation to the underlying philosophy of the ledger, whether it's going to be a slow unit of account, a slow store of value that's used for large settlement, or if it's going to be this fast-paced, super competitive system that's sharded and has high TPS and everything's done on chain. There's camps in both directions, and they need to fight it out, and eventually the community needs to reach consensus. And by the way, they have no right to be the world reserve currency and no right to claim that they're going to replace fiat if they can't reach consensus. I'm sorry. You can't come to me and tell me your system's better if you can't make decisions in your system. Only when you found a way to get people who disagree to find a way to agree can you say your system is better, or else my system is better, because I can at least get people to agree. Might not be optimal, but we can move forward when we have to and when we have to make changes.
Incredible. Terrific. Before we shift gears just to a quick rapid fire question round, NEM. Any thoughts on NEM? Obviously, you already mentioned transaction per second. Theirs is through the roof, but what do you think about their proof of importance and what they're building over there in Japan?
Extremely little about NEM, and I haven't really invested a lot of time into looking into NEM. I've talked to some people in the NEM community years ago, but it's just one of those projects that I don't have the time or desire to really look into. And maybe sometime in the future I will, but I have no opinion on them.
Okay, terrific. Now, Charles, before we open it to the live audience for a quick Q&A, we're just going to do a quick rapid fire round. I'm going to give you a few options. You try to pick the right one, okay?
Okay.
So we've got 5 questions, and I have some really exciting news. If you can answer all 5 correctly, Roger Ver himself has pledged to donate 1,000 BTC to help feed starving children in Africa. Well,
really?
I'm pulling for you, Charles. Are you ready?
Okay. No pressure or anything like that. Go ahead. Crypto, you there? Crypto.
Oh, Charles, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Terrific.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No,
first question, ETH or ETH? ETH or ETH?
ETH.
Correct. All right. Second question, DC or Marvel?
Oh, come on, man. Marvel.
Absolutely 110 fucking % correct. Number 3, Wayne or Garth?
Oh, that one's hard, man. I like Wayne a lot.
Excellent. Correct. All right. Satoshi Nakamoto. Was it Hal Finney, Nick Szabo, or the NSA?
It was not Hal Finney. If it was anybody, it was probably Nick Szabo, but doesn't matter. He's dead.
Correct. Family Matters or Full House. Final question. 1,000 BTC to starving children in Africa on the line. Here we go.
What you
Charles,
talking about, Crypto?
Family Matters or Full House?
Oh, come on. Family Matters.
Oh, I am so sorry, Charles. The answer our judges were looking for was the Fresh Prince of of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
The
You're
Fresh Prince
incorrect.
of Bel-Air.
I wish there was something I could do, but Roger demands 5 for 5.
Right,
Better
right.
luck next time, starving kids in Africa.
Oh, that's okay.
All
That's
right, Charles, I've watched a lot of developer interviews. Generally, they put more people to sleep than the Texas prison system. I've had a really good time tonight, so thank you so much for your candor, your sense of humor, your insight, and most of all, putting up with some of our nonsense. Right now, if you have some time, I'd love to open questions.
Yeah, I mean, they've listened to me ramble for over 2 hours. We got to at least give them some questions.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm going to do. So feel free to pick some from the chat box, or if you want me to throw some at you.
I'm not even looking.
Whatever you'd like.
You just pick whatever. Yeah, you just go ahead and pick whatever. I'm not even looking at the chat box. I never do these things.
Okay, Charles. So what do you think about the IOTA's Tangle consensus algorithm? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, Tangle is like a directed acyclic graph where instead of using blocks, you use transactions and you link them together. And it's made by some mathematician. So there's probably some good research there. And actually, one of the guys who works with me, Alex Cherpinoy, knows the guy who created Tangle pretty well. So I haven't read the paper in detail, but anything in the DAG ecosystem is pretty interesting. Because what you're basically doing is saying you don't care as much about forks, and you have some way of like turning your whole ecosystem into like a nice little graph. It's less useful, I think, for a traditional Bitcoin style system, and maybe more useful for a smart contract type of a system where you have these little computation domains and you want to chain them together. So I'm inclined to say it's probably good research, but I haven't done enough serious review on it. But I do know the authors are credible people, so I suspect that it's probably a pretty good product. Next question.
All right, let's see what we've got available. Anybody, if you have any questions, feel free to open them up. This is one of your few opportunities to get Charles' attention real quick. Let's see. I mean, there are some random questions. MaidSafe, do you have any opinions on MaidSafe?
You know, they've been doing this for a really long time, like 7 years now, I think, and maybe 8 years. And they're certainly a pretty motivated team. I wish them well, and I hope that Dave and his guys over in Scotland can get it done. I like storage a lot, and also I like IPFS, but the underlying tech of MaidSafe I haven't spent too much time looking at. But you always got to root for the underdog. I mean, they just kind of like persistently have been chipping away at things, and so I do hope they succeed and that they can get some impact. Next question.
Absolutely. So I think I already know the answer to this. Maybe you put some more time looking into it. But what about the basic attention token in their advertising model? I know your previous stance was why not just make some bots to view ads and stack money. But how are you feeling now?
Yeah, I'm going to defer because we have a due diligence team looking at Steem, ad token, and BAT, and they're going to do a roll-up report similar to how we did a report with the Dash Treasury model. So it would be unfair to that team to bias anything we have coming out. So I'll defer that until the report is released. And then as soon as it is, I'll send you a copy that you can share with your audience. And we'll have a section on what we think of bats, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm sure Brendan will have a lovely time debating it.
Terrific. Now, what about the Corian platform as a whole specifically, and as well as thoughts on their ICO coming up?
I haven't really spent much time with it. There's a lot of these new next generation platforms that promise to have like super scalable smart contracts with proof of stake and all these other things. And maybe they work, maybe they don't work. I don't know. And I don't even know where in the spectrum those guys fall. You know, I tend to pay attention to projects that have three criteria. One, that the team has done something. Like I pay attention to Zcash because you have Zuko and Andrew Miller. Zuko and I happen to be neighbors. I live pretty close to where he lives, and occasionally we go for sushi. I always buy it, which is great. But Zuko's a really nice guy, and we both went to the same university, and we can have great conversations even when we disagree. And so I have tremendous respect for how he does things and how he thinks. Sometimes we disagree, but we have respect. Same for Andrew Miller and other people. So one, I have to kind of know something about the team and what they've done and where they're coming from. Two, the customer acquisition side of it, the community acquisition side of it has to make sense to me. There has to be a growth model that's built into it that says people are just going to want to use this thing. And then three, the actual governance structure of how they execute and do things, that has to make a lot of sense to me too. Where's the money coming from? How are they spending the money? Is there federation in that, or is it a dictatorship? Where are decisions being made? How are those decisions being made, and so forth? So very few projects in the space happen to satisfy all three of those criteria, so I don't tend to pay a lot of attention to them unless they get really, really big, like they grow to several $billion and they have this incredibly evangelistic community and they do something to drag me in. Like I didn't even pay any attention to Dash until Amanda made a video about me. And I was like, Dash, I think that was Darkcoin or something. I was like so checked out of that. And then I went in and talked to the community, and I found the Treasury so fascinating that we ended up doing a paper on it. So if they deliver something to market that's really compelling, or EOS or any of these other guys, we'll certainly do due diligence on them, just like we're doing with Steem, Bats, and AdToken.
Great. Our next question comes from Timothy Weber. Seems to be fishing for a soundbite. Charles, what do you think of Chris DeRose and his pessimism?
You know, Tone Vays and Chris and all these other guys, they serve a very valid role in the space. We can question their methods and their bedside manner, but when everybody's making boatloads of money and everybody seems to look like they're winners, you have to have somebody on the other side of it saying, let's slow down a little bit. Maybe this isn't right. A great example would be Peter Schiff during the mortgage-backed securities buildup. You had all these people making colossal amounts of money off of a house of cards, and they were doing it legally and they were doing it in plain sight. You had people like Peter Schiff saying, this is wrong, it's not going to work, and this whole damn thing is going to come collapsing down. So I look at Chris DeRose and Tone and others as kind of just an extension of that long line of people. And you know, they've chosen, for whatever reason, to be a little bit more sharp-elbowed and caustic about it. And they've certainly said some very nice things about me and other people, but that's fine, because that's their base and their audience, and there is some truth behind some of the things that they say. I will say, though, on the other side of it, when you argue from a position of dogmatism, meaning that you're not actually looking at the facts as they are, but rather you're looking at a belief and applying that to everything, you do tend to miss a lot of opportunities. And this has always happened in business. For example, look at IBM. Their paradigm back in the 80s and the 70s was hardware is where all the money is. So they didn't care at all about who controlled the software, all these other things. So the prospect of letting some college dropout control the license to DOS, fuck it, let's do it. Who cares? It's just a thing, right? Because their paradigm is, I make my money by selling units. And that guy went on to be Microsoft and build up this enormous Goliath. And by the way, the same dogmatism that made Microsoft so valuable made Microsoft also miss the open source revolution, the social media revolution, the search revolution, and the mobile device revolution. And they couldn't move to a hardware company fast enough. And now their lunch has been eaten by Google and Apple. So the other side of the Chris DeRoses and the Tones and these guys is, if they're just arguing from a position of dogma, they will be right where the dogma applies, but they will miss legitimately useful, great things. I think the thing they missed was Ethereum. They believed it's a scam because of the way it was funded, because of the growth model, whatever it may be. But if you're objectively to look at both of these ecosystems, they do different things, they have different philosophies, and they both contribute a lot of value. That's not just me talking. That's over 100 companies that have joined the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance talking. That's researchers from places like Princeton and places like Yale and places like Cornell who have invested a lot of their time and in some cases their professional reputation to say that there is something real here. To say this is all a scam because somebody raised some money and then one day the page is going to turn and it's all going to come collapsing down, I think is enormously naive. Going back to our ETC, ETH debate, where maybe ETC had some actors in it in the beginning who did not want to actually build an ecosystem. They just wanted to punish ETH. But they're gone. And we're here where we're at now. And ETC is its own thing, and we're building our own ecosystem. So similarly, maybe there were some people in ETH who wanted to make a lot of money. And you know what happens is they go about their way, they've made their money. And now you still have the community there. You have millions of people, you have all these developers, you have all this infrastructure, and people are doing real things with it. So you can either live in the past and hold whatever happened in your view was wrong forever against the platform, or you can realize that in the future and in today, you have to assess the facts on the ground. And you have to ask, are they producing value? Do they have a good community? Do they have a strategy for actually realizing some of the claims that they're making? In the case of Ethereum, they are, but this is totally denounced and completely dogmatically thrown out of the window with people like Chris and Tone. And that's where I think they're weak. So I think they're valuable by being the contrarian and being the guy that says maybe we need to be a little bit more careful. And that's really important, especially when you're in a boom cycle, because it protects people. But then also on the other side of the token, I think they tend to be a bit too much resistant to change, and ultimately will personally miss a lot of revolutions that occur as a consequence.
Terrific. What about Cardano ADA? How is the progress coming on that?
So Cardano is actually one of our greatest projects. We're having a hell of a lot of fun on that. So I'll give very briefly the backstory, and we have a lot of announcements coming out, so I won't spill all the beans there. But basically, when I, way back in the podcast mentioned,
spill all the beans. I don't mean to interrupt you, but feel free.
Like, right.
Spill beans.
Well, actually, some of which were still under embargo on it. So even if I wanted to, it would be a good idea. But anyway, when I mentioned regulated computation with principles, we took a contract to build a platform where we feel that we can actually do that and do that in the developing world. So we started major coding work last year on it. There's 25 full-time developers working on it. That's our entire Haskell side. And we have a lot of white papers we've written, a lot of things we've done. We're just about to open up our 5th test net. We have our test wallet out. It's called Daedalus, and actually we're turning Daedalus into a universal platform so you can bring wallets in. So like Pivx can put a wallet on, or other people. So we'll have a plugin system and an app store for that, and we'll be able to add a lot of really cool things. But I don't want to spoil it. But it is a great project, and we're really excited about it. And our Blockchain Explorer is up, our testnet is up, and soon to be version 5. And we anticipate we'll be releasing the first mainnet version, but there'll be many hard forks planned along the way, sometime probably July or August, I think. But you know, factors depend. We wanted to release it a lot earlier, back in February, but we had a hell of a lot of engineering problems with Haskell. We underestimated just the sheer pain and complexity of DevOps. We also underestimated the maturity of network stuff in the Haskell ecosystem, and we ended up doing a lot of bespoke work, which bit us in the ass. So it slowed down development time tremendously, and we had to bring in a lot of really strong people like Practical Network Solutions, as well as a company called Well-Typed to work with us and help augment the platform. So overall, we're really happy where we're at. And there's a lot of really good people in that ecosystem, and it's going to be a fun announcement when we make it. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by it. You know, it's something we're going to be working on for quite some time. Our contract is until 2020 for Cardano, and all the tech will be in the open domain. In fact, you go to our website to read more about it. It's one of our project tabs has it. You can also look at our GitHub repo and take a look at the 6,300 commits we've made for Cardano SL. And actually, that's why we created Ouroboros, the provably secure proof of stake paper. That's the consensus algorithm that Cardano is using.
It's terrific. So what about the new Emerald wallet? How's that coming?
Oh, for ETC? You know, I've talked to Splix when I was in New York at Barry's event. And we also ran into each other at Consensus. And it seems to me like that's coming along quite well, but I don't know exactly where they're at in that life cycle or development flow. So I suspect probably sometime during the summer, something is going to come out and it's going to look pretty good. And it's actually kind of fun because there's going to be a little competition, because Growth and Deek is coming out in July as well. So I suspect that people in the ETC community are going to get a lot of new toys to play with over the summer, and it's going to be good for all of us.
Excellent. Next question is, let's see. Oh, yes, Scala versus Go, and will that encourage more Corn developers to choose ETC over ETH?
Yeah, so they're very different languages, and they have very different thought processes and very different paradigms. Okay, so Go is a direct reflection of Google's frustration with C++ and C. They say, we have all this infrastructure that is in C, we hate it with unrelenting passion. It just like kills our souls inside. So they did what all great companies do when they have a lot of money, a research division. They went and got to the best PLT people they had available, and they said, go build us a really good programming language. And that's what they did. It has incredibly fast compile times and you know, all these great little features under the hood. It uses a lot of stuff that Tony Hoare came up with called CSP. And Go is a great language for implementing a cryptocurrency. In fact, I think Ethereum was one of the first, if not the first, to use Go to implement a altcoin. There was a Go BTC client called, I think it was just BTC. I can't remember the name of it, but there is a Go Bitcoin client. But I think we were the first altcoin to actually do a client. So Go is great. Now, why Scala? Well, Scala is really better Java, and it's a marriage of two different worlds. You have this massive enterprise JVM ecosystem, which is incredibly powerful. Billions of devices live on. It is the foundation for Android and its app model, and you're never going to get away from it. And frankly, why not? Because it's a good platform. It's pretty performant. It's now secure. You had historically a lot of problems, but they've cleaned it up a lot, and they have a good roadmap. JVM 8 was great. They added Lambdas to it, and JVM 9 is going to have all these great modules. I think it's Sawtooth or whatever it's called. So there's a lot of magic there. But then you're saying functional programming has a tremendous amount of value as well. Functional programming has a tremendous amount of value as well. And functional programming gives you all these things that you can't get in the imperative world, especially when you start talking about concurrency, especially when you start talking about distributed systems programming, where you have all this non-determinism in your system and all these race conditions in your system and so forth. And if every single thing in your entire world is mutable and has state and can change unpredictably, especially change in ways that you couldn't even see because somebody else did it, you didn't know they did it, the whole damn thing is just so hard to program. And this is one of the fundamental drawbacks of things like C++ and Go and other systems. So given that, with functional programming, what you've done is you've taken state and you've put it into its own little box. Like with Haskell, you have the monad, and it's its own little box. And you're saying, this is the only place where that's going to change. And everywhere else, we're just doing computation, and we understand that world, and it's really deterministic, it's really magical. So what is Scala? Scala says, I am going to take the functional world, and I'm going to marry the functional world to the JVM. And I'm going to do it in such an elegant way that you can write really concise, really nice, really beautiful code. That also works. And sometimes, especially in GUI and network and other things where you really need to be imperative or procedural, you got that. It's there. You got your mutability. But in other times when you want to be really dogmatic and play with types and do real functional stuff, you got that as well. And you leave it up to the developer to decide what side of the spectrum they want to be on, and it can be done on a case-by-case basis. Plus, you don't give anything up for the JVM world. You can call anything in the Java world. So if some guy created the world's best message broker, if you like Kafka, it's there. You got it. It's ready to go. So I think that if you're building a cryptocurrency and you're really thinking about enterprise clients that are going to be used in the private setting or going to be used with legacy infrastructure, you should pick .NET or the JVM and build something in that world. If you're in the .NET world, use F#. If you're in the JVM world, use Clojure or Scala. And these things will get you home. You'll have a great development experience. You'll write really concise, easily testable code. The performance will be really good. You don't really need to be cutting edge and bleeding edge Rust or C++ or C-level performance. You know, if you're 90%, who cares? It's good enough because you'll make it up on the concurrency side of things, right? So in particular, how is this relevant to ETC? Well, you have choice. All great projects have choice. So you have Geth with Go. You have parity with Rust, and Grothendieck is coming out, and we're going to have a Scala client. And you get to decide, the consumer, which one of these is best for you and which one's going to fit into your paradigm. With Grothendieck, we're really concerned about developer experience, enterprise applications, IoT, and other things. And we've made a strategic bet that the JVM is going to be the horse to ride to make that really appealing. But you know what? Some people are going to say the JVM is not secure. Some people are going to say it's not performant. Some people are going to say, I just hate Java. I hate the JVM. Fuck all you guys. And that's fine because they have Go and they have parity, you know, and these things will work just fine for them. And those will be great ecosystems for them to live in. You have to have choice as a consumer.
Terrific. Charles, do you have time for another question? If I will warn you that I think this question is going to tie you up for a little bit.
I'm already over my time budget, but if it's a brief question, I can answer, but I can't.
I don't know about that. I'll let you be the judge. I'll pose the question. You can decide if you want to be brief or postpone it. Obviously, you are welcome back literally anytime you want. So the question is, what is the point of decentralized consensus when a small bunch of actors own a large amount of tokens, and is this problem solvable? I think this specifically relating to the bad ICO and kind of the centralized fallout.
That's actually not a hard question to answer. So I'll ask you a question. When Microsoft was started, how many people were there and how much of Microsoft did they own? Do you have?
Oh, 2 and like 90%, right? Something along those lines?
Actually, it was 100%, and it was 64-36. Bill Gates had 64%. Paul Allen had 36%. Two guys. Now, how many people own Microsoft stock, and how many people work for Microsoft, and how big of a company is Microsoft? It's perfectly okay to build a movement where that movement has a very small group of people in the beginning. If the way that you set up the movement is to organically decentralize, organically federate, that's fine. So you have to ask yourself, is that set up that way? Well, you have to allow easy exit. You have to allow easy entry. You have to ask how are decisions being made and at what point will those decisions be decentralized and so forth. And if you have a lot of those characteristics and those elements baked in, built in to your system, then you end up actually getting a really good system. A great example would be Wikipedia. When Wikipedia started, it's not like Jimmy had a whole bunch of people just sitting there ready to go and like 5 million people say, I'm gonna write me an encyclopedia. No. It was a very small group of people writing very biased articles, but it had baked into its model the ability to grow. And now we have Wikipedia that we've come to know and love, and we ended up actually getting pretty decent articles. Are they perfect? No, but it's a lot better than what it was. So similarly, all of these things are judged on that spectrum. So it's okay to start mostly centralized. It's okay to have a small group of people own it. But then the onus is on those group of people to tell me and tell the community and show the community through their acts, through their protocols, and through their use of capital, a gradual decentralization. And if they can do that, then I think the system is viable and will gradually decentralize. But it's not easy, kind of like evolution, where the most likely outcome is death and failure. Similarly, the vast majority of these projects will end up fizzling out and failing. And from their bones, you can learn a lot of lessons, and inevitably one will succeed, and then it becomes the model that all of us can use. Just like DigiCash failed, and Bcash failed, and BitGold failed, and all of these other ideas for 25 years with digital tokens before Bitcoin came out. And similarly, thousands of altcoins will fail before you get the next Ethereum, and then you just kind of move on from there.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for all of your time. I know we went nearly an hour over, and I still only got to like 10% of my notes and questions. So if you ever feel like being charitable and coming on our fledgling broadcast again, you are literally welcome every time. Thank you so much for appearing on our show. Thank you so much for what you're doing to help build the community and what I feel is the infrastructure of the future. Your contributions have been nothing shy of titanic, and that should be a blockchain accepted belief. Whether somebody is the staunchest Ethereum, Charles is a mutineer kind of guy, or not. Thank you for coming on, and I hope you have a terrific call with China.
Okay.
Communist or not.
Well, actually, it's not China, it's Japan. We have an office in Osaka. It's input-output JP. Oh,
terrific. Terrific. I love Japan.
Yeah. And we also have people in Hong Kong right now, so I'll probably end up calling them too. It's going to be a long night. Anyway, Crypto, this has been such a pleasure, and thank you so much. And also to the audience, thank you so much. I wish I could have answered more of your questions, and next time we'll probably set up a format where we can. And demand all the other guys get on. We need to get Roger and Eric and all these other guys on the show so we can actually get some of this philosophy documented and make sure that there's a good dialogue. So have a wonderful night, and thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Have a great one. And yes, I will be doing everything I can to start setting up these live streams with everybody else. And like I said, a constant invitation whenever you would like. Have a terrific evening, and thanks again.
Cheers.
Have a good one, Charles. And to the audience, thank you for appearing. I know a lot of you are now watching this live, and you're watching this on a pre-recorded version. And I hope it comes across as eloquently and passionately as Charles is about the community. Thank you very much for watching our live stream. Thank you very much for watching our recording. And I'm going to be starting a new ICO of the month feature that will probably be the next episode. And it probably won't happen until early next week, but there's hours of information to unpack here. And I know personally I'm going to be unpacking this for months to come. So again, I know he's already offline, but thank you again to Charles Hoskinson. And thanks to everybody who showed up to our first live stream. All right, guys, have a great night. Talk to you soon.